Take that crying brat to the kitchen before you ruin my anniversary party. You look like a homeless beggar. Those were my mother's words as I stood in the grand foyer of her Boston estate, clutching my 1-month-old son. She was about to shove me toward the servant quarters when a sharp voice cut through the room. Is this why I have been sending a $500,000 trust fund every month? So my great-grandson can wear rags? I turned to see my billionaire grandmother, back from Europe after 5 years. I looked her dead in the eye and said I have never received a single dollar. Her face went white, and she immediately pulled out her phone to call her legal team. What happened next tore my family's perfect facade to shreds. If you have ever been the scapegoat of your family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe, because you will want to see exactly how I destroyed their empire. My name is Abigail, and I am 33 years old. For my entire life, I was the designated failure of my family. My parents, Richard and Patricia, cared about 2 things above all else: social status and money. Growing up in our affluent Boston suburb, their love was entirely conditional. If you made them look good to their country club friends, you were rewarded. If you did not fit their mold of high society perfection, you were discarded. My younger sister Savannah, who is 28, was their golden child. She was everything they wanted: loud, obsessed with designer labels, and willing to play the dutiful socialite. I was the quiet one, who preferred coding and designing digital interfaces over attending debutante balls. Because I chose to work freelance rather than marry into a wealthy family, my parents treated me like a contagious disease. The climax of their cruelty happened at their 35th wedding anniversary party. It was the middle of December, and the Boston air was freezing. I had debated not going at all, but my father had sent me a text demanding my presence. He said it would look bad if their eldest daughter did not show up for the family portrait. I arrived wearing a plain wool coat I had bought from a thrift store years ago. Inside my coat, bundled against my chest, was my newborn son, Leo. Leo was only a month old. His father, a man I thought I would marry, had walked out the moment I told him I was pregnant. My parents had been endlessly disgusted by this. A single mother was a stain on their pristine reputation. As I walked into the main hall of my parents' suburban Boston mansion, the contrast between my life and theirs was staggering. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over women in silk gowns and men in tailored tuxedos. Waiters carried trays of expensive champagne. Savannah stood in the center of the room, wearing a diamond necklace that cost more than most people make in a year. Her husband Gregory, a finance broker with a permanently smug expression, had his arm around her waist. They were laughing loudly, holding court with a group of investors. I tried to slip in quietly, hoping to just take the required family photo and leave, but Leo started to fuss. It was a soft, hungry cry, but in that quiet, elegant room, it sounded like an alarm siren. Patricia swooped down on me like a hawk. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my coat. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed, dragging me away from the main hall and toward a swinging door that led to the catering kitchen. "Look at you. You look like a street rat. I told you to dress appropriately." "I am dressed appropriately for someone who just had a baby," I replied calmly, trying to shield Leo from her aggressive grip. "You are embarrassing us," Patricia spat out. "Gregory invited the senior partners from his investment firm tonight. Do you know how hard he works to maintain our family image? And here you come parading your bastard child around in cheap rags. Go sit at the small table by the kitchen doors. Do not mingle, do not talk to the VIP guests. Just stay out of sight until the photographer is ready." I felt a familiar knot of anger in my chest, but I bit my tongue. I was used to this treatment. What I was not used to was the sound of a heavy wooden cane striking the marble floor behind us. "Patricia, step away from my granddaughter!" The entire room seemed to freeze. I turned around and gasped. Standing there wrapped in a heavy mink coat was my grandmother Beatrice. She was 78 years old and a legend in the Boston real estate world. 5 years ago, she had moved to a private estate in Switzerland due to health issues. My parents had told me she was too frail to travel or take calls. They said she wanted to be left completely alone, but here she was, standing tall, her sharp eyes scanning my faded coat and the tiny bundled baby in my arms. She walked toward me, ignoring the gasps of the party guests. She reached out a trembling hand and gently touched Leo's cheek. Then she looked at my worn-out clothes, and her expression darkened into a terrifying frown. "Abigail?" she said, her voice echoing in the sudden silence of the hall. "Is this a joke? Why are you dressed like this? Why is my great-grandson wrapped in a faded blanket? Is this why I have been sending a $500,000 trust fund every month? So my family can look like beggars?" The words hung in the air. $500,000 a month. My brain struggled to process the numbers. I looked at Beatrice, completely bewildered. "Grandma," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "What trust fund? I have never received a single dollar from you. I thought you cut me off when you moved to Switzerland. Mom and Dad said you did not want to speak to me anymore." Beatrice froze. The color drained from her face, replaced instantly by a fiery, dangerous red. She slowly turned her head to look at my mother. Patricia was visibly trembling. Her expensive champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. Richard, my father, rushed over, his face pale and sweating. "Mother," he stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "It is a misunderstanding. Abigail is confused. You know she struggles with her mental health. She is just trying to cause drama because she is jealous of Savannah." Beatrice did not even blink. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her smartphone. She dialed a number, keeping her eyes locked on my terrified parents. "Hello, Charles," Beatrice said, speaking to her lead attorney. "I need you to freeze the Boston accounts immediately. All of them. Yes. Call the forensic accountants. We have a massive embezzlement issue. Someone has been stealing Abigail's trust fund." Richard lunged forward, trying to grab the phone from his own mother. "Mother, please, do not do this. You are making a scene. People are watching. She is lying to you to get more money." "Do not you dare touch me!" Beatrice roared, striking his hand away with her cane. "I personally signed the authorization for that trust 5 years ago. $500,000 a month meant exclusively for Abigail and her future children. If she has not seen a dime, then I know exactly which rats have been raiding the pantry." The party erupted into chaotic whispers. Savannah and Gregory hurried over, trying to play damage control. Gregory attempted his usual smooth-talking finance bro routine. Beatrice let us step into the private study. "We can explain the investment strategy we used for Abigail's funds." "Shut your mouth, Gregory," Beatrice snapped. "I will deal with you and your fraudulent investment firm tomorrow." Patricia completely lost her mind. The facade of the elegant society hostess vanished. She turned her panic and rage onto me. "You ungrateful little witch!" Patricia screamed, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You planned this. You brought her here to ruin my anniversary. You just want to steal the money that belongs to this family." "Belongs to the family I asked?" My voice deadly calm. "Grandma just said the trust was under my name." Patricia grabbed my coat, violently shaking me. Leo started to wail in my arms. I pushed her back hard, stepping away to protect my son. "Do not play the victim!" Patricia shrieked, her face twisted with malice. "You think you deserve that money? You are a failure. You sit at home playing on your computer while Savannah actually goes out and builds connections. We use that money to fund Savannah's lifestyle because she actually deserves it, just like when we gave her your art school scholarship money so she could travel across Europe. You owe us that money for raising you." The entire room gasped. She had just confessed to stealing my scholarship money out loud in front of Boston's elite. For years, she had told me the school rescinded the offer. Richard grabbed Patricia's arm, trying to silence her, but she was too hysterical. "Listen to me, Abigail," Richard threatened, lowering his voice to a vicious whisper. "You are going to tell Beatrice that you gave us permission to manage those funds. If you do not, I swear to God, I will call my lawyers tomorrow and file for emergency custody of Leo. You are a broke, unemployed single mother living in a tiny apartment. We have millions. No judge will let you keep that child. We will take him from you, and you will never see him again." My breath caught in my throat. They were threatening to steal my baby. The people who gave me life were willing to destroy mine to protect their stolen wealth. I looked at Richard, then at Patricia, and finally at Savannah, who was glaring at me with pure hatred. I did not cry. I did not scream. The years of wanting their love vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I adjusted Leo's blanket, soothing his cries with a gentle shush. I looked over at Beatrice, who was watching me with fierce, protective eyes. "Grandma," I said evenly, "go home and rest. Let your lawyers do their job. As for the trash in this room, please do not dirty your hands. I will take care of them myself." Without another word, I turned my back on my parents and walked out the heavy oak doors of the mansion. I stepped out into the freezing Boston snow. The cold air hit my face, but I felt completely numb. They had stolen millions from me. They had stolen my future, my scholarship, my relationship with my grandmother. And now they were threatening to steal my son. I reached my beat-up Honda Civic parked at the very edge of the estate. As I strapped Leo securely into his car seat, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a push notification from my banking app. "Alert! Your credit card ending in 4092 has been charged $12,500 at Chanel Newbury Street. Transaction approved." I stared at the screen. That was my only personal credit card, the one I kept for extreme emergencies. It had a $15,000 limit, and it was now nearly maxed out. A second later, a text message popped up from Savannah. "Borrowed your emergency card from your purse while you were crying to Grandma. Bought a new party bag for Gregory's corporate gala next week. Consider it rent for letting you breathe our air tonight. Do not bother canceling. I already walked out of the store. Have fun paying that off with your zero income, loser." She had dug into my purse in the coat room. She thought she could push me into absolute poverty to force me to comply with my father's custody threat. They thought I was a helpless, broke designer who would have to crawl back to them on my knees. They were so incredibly wrong. I got into the driver's seat and turned on the heater. I pulled my laptop out of my bag and opened it, resting it on the steering wheel. The screen lit up the dark interior of the car. I did not open a standard checking account. I opened a secure, encrypted portal. For the past 5 years, while my family thought I was a failed freelance designer scraping by on pennies, I had been building something else. I created a revolutionary user interface architecture that optimized workflow for massive financial institutions. I had founded a company called AB Tech Solutions. Because I knew my family would try to sabotage or steal anything I built, I operated completely under the radar. I used a corporate proxy and a registered agent to hide my identity. To the business world, the CEO of AB Tech Solutions was an anonymous genius. To my family, I was just Abigail, the broke single mom. I logged into my corporate dashboard. My current valuation dashboard loaded, showing the company's estimated worth at $15 million. My personal liquid assets sat at just over $4 million. I had enough money to crush them 10 times over, but I had kept it hidden, wanting to live a quiet, peaceful life with my son. Not anymore. They wanted a war. I was going to give them a massacre. I picked up my phone and called my bank's premium fraud department. "Hello?" I said, my voice steady and cold. "I need to report a stolen credit card and a fraudulent charge of $12,500 at Chanel. Yes, the physical card was stolen from my purse. No, I do not authorize the charge. I would like to press full charges for credit card fraud and grand larceny. The person who stole it is Savannah. I have her text message confessing to the theft. The bank agent immediately flagged the account and transferred me to the local police dispatch. I forwarded the screenshot of Savannah's text message to the detective on duty. In the state of Massachusetts, stealing a credit card and making a purchase over $1,200 is a felony. $12,000 was grand larceny. Savannah thought she was untouchable because she was rich. She forgot that the card was in my name, and the law does not care who your daddy is when there is a written confession of theft. I closed my laptop and looked at my sleeping son in the rearview mirror. "Do not worry, Leo," I whispered to him in the quiet car. "Mommy is going to clean house." The next morning, Savannah was live on her social media. She had thousands of followers who watched her flaunt her fake wealthy lifestyle. She had set up her ring light in the foyer of her luxury townhouse, holding up the pristine white Chanel shopping bag. "Hey guys," Savannah chirped to the camera, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. "Just doing a quick unboxing of my new baby. Sometimes you just have to treat yourself, you know? Good vibes only today." She was just pulling the quilted leather bag out of the dust cover when the heavy thud of knocking echoed through her front door. Savannah frowned, visibly annoyed at the interruption. She walked over to the door, leaving her phone broadcasting live to over 5,000 viewers. She pulled the door open. "Yes? What do you want?" she demanded. Standing on her front porch were two uniformed Boston police officers. Savannah, the taller officer, asked, his hand resting near his utility belt. "Yes, who is asking?" she replied, crossing her arms defensively. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for grand larceny and credit card fraud. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Savannah's smug expression evaporated. Her jaw dropped open. "What? No! You cannot arrest me. I am rich. My husband is a finance broker. There is a mistake." "There is no mistake, ma'am. We have a written confession sent from your phone, confirming you stole the card ending in 4092. Turn around." She started screaming, thrashing wildly as the officers moved in. Gregory ran down the stairs in his bathrobe, shouting at the police, but they ordered him to step back. The officers smoothly turned Savannah around and locked the steel handcuffs onto her wrists. The sharp click of the cuffs was captured perfectly by her own microphone. As they marched her out the front door in her silk pajamas, mascara running down her face as she sobbed hysterically, her live stream chat exploded with thousands of comments. The golden child of the family was being hauled off to a holding cell, broadcast live to the exact high society crowd she spent her entire life trying to impress. And I was just getting started. The loud banging on my peeling front door echoed through the small living room, making Leo jump in his bassinet. I gently patted his tiny chest until his breathing settled, then walked toward the entryway. I did not even need to check the peephole. I knew exactly who was on the other side. "Open this door right now!" my mother Patricia shrieked, her fists pounding against the cheap wood. "I know you are in there. Open up before your father kicks it down." I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Patricia and Richard shoved their way inside without waiting for an invitation. Patricia looked entirely unhinged. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and she was still wearing the expensive evening gown from last night's disaster of an anniversary party, her cheeks smeared with wrinkled mascara. Richard slammed the door shut behind them, his face purple with rage. "Call the precinct and drop the charges," he demanded, skipping any form of greeting. "You are going to call the detectives right this second and tell them you made a mistake. You will say you gave Savannah permission to use that credit card." "I gave her no such thing," I replied, crossing my arms and standing my ground. "She stole my property and committed grand larceny. The police read her rights on a live broadcast to thousands of people. I have nothing to drop. Patricia lunged forward, her face twisted in absolute disgust. You vindictive monster! Your sister is sitting in a holding cell. They fingerprinted her. They took her mugshot. Savannah has a gala to attend this weekend, and you have her locked up with common criminals over a few $1,000s? $12,500. I corrected her, keeping my voice dangerously quiet so as not to wake Leo. And she stole it to buy a purse. She literally texted me boasting that she took it as rent for breathing the same air as you people. Because you owe us, Patricia screamed, ignoring my warning tone. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. We fed you, we clothed you. When Savannah needed a luxury car for college, who do you think paid for it? We did. You were perfectly capable of taking out student loans for your own tuition, but Savannah needed to keep up appearances. Now you begrudge her a single handbag? You forced me to work 3 jobs to pay off the debt you took out in my name. I shot back the years of suppressed resentment finally boiling over. You forged my signature on a student loan application to pay for her luxury vacation to Milan. I spent 5 years eating instant noodles to fix my credit score, while she was sipping champagne on a yacht. That is what families do, Richard barked, stepping closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. The strong support the beautiful. Savannah is the face of this family. She is married to a top-tier finance broker. She has an image to maintain. You sit in this run-down apartment typing on a laptop all day? What do you even need good credit for? You have no ambition, no husband, and a baby you cannot even afford. I let out a harsh laugh. The irony of his words was almost suffocating. He was standing in a $600 a month apartment, completely unaware that the woman he was insulting was sitting on millions of dollars in liquid assets. He had no idea I was the CEO of an enterprise worth $15 million. To him, I was just Abigail the easy target. I am not dropping the charges, I stated, firmly pointing toward the door. Savannah is an adult. She broke the law, and now she gets to face the consequences. Get out of my home before I call the police and have you both arrested for trespassing. Patricia gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. You would send your own mother to jail? After everything I have sacrificed for you? After we protected you from the burden of managing that massive trust fund Beatrice set up? We took that money because you would have squandered it. Savannah knows how to utilize wealth. You do not. You stole my money to fund a fake lifestyle, I said, utterly disgusted by her twisted logic. Now leave. Richard did not move toward the door. Instead, his expression shifted from blind rage to a cold, calculated malice. He reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick manila folder. He tossed it onto my scratched coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud that made the cheap wood rattle. I thought you might be stubborn, Richard sneered, adjusting his expensive cufflinks. You always were a difficult, ungrateful child. So I came prepared to force your hand. I glanced at the folder, but did not touch it. What is that? That is your absolute ruin, he replied smoothly. Go ahead. Open it. I cautiously stepped forward and flipped open the cover. Inside was a multi-page contract, complete with notary stamps and official-looking letterheads. I scanned the first page, and my blood ran cold. It was a loan agreement for $200,000, bearing my full legal name, my social security number, and my exact signature. The lender listed on the document was a notorious underground syndicate operating out of South Boston, a group well known for violent debt collection, extortion, and money laundering. This is fake, I said, immediately dropping the paper back onto the table. I never signed this. I do not owe anyone $200,000. Of course it is. Fake Richard laughed, a harsh, grating sound that filled the small room. But the signature is a perfect match. I lifted it from that useless art portfolio you showed me years ago. The notary is a close friend of mine who owes me a very large favor. As far as any court, any police officer, or any Child Protective Services agent is concerned, this document is absolutely real. My stomach twisted violently. What are you trying to do? Patricia stepped up beside him, her lips curling into a wicked, triumphant smile. Your father is simply securing your cooperation, Abigail. You see, if you do not pick up your phone right now and drop the charges against Savannah, this document goes completely public. Think about it, Richard added, pacing the small room like a predator cornering its prey. A struggling single freelance designer, deeply in debt to violent loan sharks. What do you think your clients will say when I post this online? What will the tech companies you contract for do when they see you are a massive liability? No legitimate business will ever hire you again. Your entire career will be wiped out overnight. You will not be able to get a job flipping burgers. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a sinister, threatening whisper. And even better, what do you think family court will say? A broke, single mother, mixed up with the mob, endangering the life of her newborn son. I will personally hand this document over to Child Protective Services. They will take Leo away from you before the sun goes down today. We will take full custody of him, and you will never, ever see your son again. The air in the room felt suddenly too thin to breathe. My hands balled into fists so tight, my nails cut deep into my palms. They were actually doing this. My own parents were blackmailing me with forged syndicate documents, threatening to destroy my livelihood and steal my baby, all to keep their spoiled, thieving daughter out of a jail cell. You are absolute monsters, I said, my voice shaking with pure, unadulterated hatred. You would ruin my life just to save hers. Savannah matters, Patricia snapped without a single shred of remorse. She has a reputation. She has a wealthy husband. You have absolutely nothing to lose, Abigail. You are already a failure. Now make the call. Tell the police Savannah had your permission to use the card. I looked down at the forged contract on the table. In a normal situation, proving a forgery of this magnitude could take months of grueling legal battles. During that time, they could easily leak the document, ruin my public standing, and initiate a terrifying custody war. They knew I was fiercely protective of Leo. They thought they had finally found my breaking point. I will give you exactly 3 seconds to pick up that phone, Richard commanded, pulling out his own cell phone to dial his contacts. 1. I stood frozen, calculating my next move. I had the financial resources of my tech company to fight them, but a sudden raid by Child Services would be terrifying and traumatizing for Leo. 2. Patricia crossed her arms, her eyes shining with absolute venomous triumph. You always were incredibly weak, Abigail. You never had the spine to fight us. Before Richard could finish his countdown, the front door of my apartment, which they had failed to latch properly when they barged in, was pushed wide open. The old hinges groaned loudly against the sudden force. The heavy, rhythmic thud of a wooden cane striking the floorboards echoed through the narrow hallway. Patricia and Richard whipped around, their triumphant expressions instantly dissolving into sheer, unadulterated terror. Standing in the doorway was my grandmother Beatrice. She was wearing a tailored black overcoat, her silver hair pulled back into a severe bun, her eyes blazing with an anger so intense it seemed to suck the heat right out of the room. Flanking her were 3 tall men in immaculate black suits, their faces like carved stone, carrying thick leather briefcases. Beatrice stepped into the living room. She did not look at the peeling wallpaper or the cheap furniture. She kept her piercing, furious gaze locked entirely on her son. She raised her cane and slammed the heavy silver tip down against the hardwood floor with a deafening crack. Try touching a single hair on my granddaughter's head, Richard Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a lethal, vibrating register. Try it, and I will personally see to it that you spend the rest of your miserable life rotting in a federal prison." The sheer terror on my father's face was something I had never witnessed before. Richard stumbled backward, bumping into Patricia, who looked as if she had seen a ghost. The forged loan document fluttered from the table to the floor, entirely forgotten. Beatrice did not wait for their excuses. She gestured to the lead attorney beside her, a sharp-featured man who immediately pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase and slapped it against Richard's chest. "That is a formal notice of investigation," the attorney stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You have 48 hours to surrender all financial records regarding Abigail's trust fund. Furthermore, if you attempt to contact Child Protective Services with fraudulent documents, we will press federal charges for extortion. Now get out of this apartment before I have you both arrested for trespassing." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but the murderous glare from Beatrice silenced her instantly. Grabbing Richard by the arm, my mother dragged him out the door, both of them fleeing down the hallway like terrified rats. Once they were gone, Beatrice turned to me, her fierce expression melting into absolute warmth. She looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully in his bassinet, gently stroking his tiny hand before looking back at me. "Pack your things, Abigail," she said softly. "You and Leo are coming with me to my lawyer's office. It is time you saw exactly what they have been doing in the dark." An hour later, I was sitting in a high-rise boardroom overlooking downtown Boston. Beatrice sat at the head of the long mahogany table, while a team of forensic accountants displayed a complex web of transactions on the projector screen. As they walked me through the numbers, the sheer scale of the betrayal made my blood run cold. Patricia and Richard had not just been pocketing the $500,000 a month. They had actively laundered it to hide their tracks. And the architect of this massive financial crime was none other than Gregory Savannah's husband. Gregory used his position as a senior portfolio manager at Vanguard Capital to set up a shadow trust, the lead accountant explained, pointing a laser pointer at a flowchart. "He routed your grandmother's monthly deposits into offshore shell companies. He then brought the money back into the country under the guise of legitimate investment returns for Richard and Patricia. In exchange for cleaning the stolen money, Gregory took a massive 20% management fee every single month. That is how he funded Savannah's extreme luxury lifestyle and bought his way into the firm's upper management." My jaw tightened. Gregory, the man who constantly mocked my modest living and paraded his wealth at every family gathering, was wearing suits bought with money stolen from my newborn son. My phone vibrated violently against the conference table. The caller ID flashed Gregory's name. I looked at Beatrice, then picked up the phone and pressed the speaker button, ensuring the call recording app on my laptop was capturing every word. Abigail Gregory barked, his voice breathless and frantic. "You need to call the police right now and drop the charges against Savannah. She is having a panic attack in a holding cell. The press is already sniffing around the precinct. I am not dropping anything, Gregory," I replied coldly. "She stole from me." "Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic loser," he snarled, dropping his usual polished finance broker persona. "Your parents just called me in a panic about Beatrice. I know what you are trying to do, but it is not going to work. If you do not call the precinct and retract your statement in the next 10 minutes, I am going to destroy you." I leaned back in my leather chair. "Is that so? And how do you plan to do that?" "I will go straight to family court," Gregory threatened, his voice dripping with malice. "I will testify under oath that Leo is the result of a drug-fueled night with multiple men. I will pay witnesses to say you are a negligent, abusive mother who leaves her baby alone in a filthy apartment while entertaining clients. With my reputation and resources, a judge will take that bastard child away from you before the weekend. You will lose your kid, Abigail. Do you hear me? Drop the charges or say goodbye to Leo." I stared at the recording timer on my screen, watching the seconds tick by. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I just smiled, a razor-thin smile. Thank you for your input, Gregory, I said evenly. Have a great day at the office. I hung up the phone. The boardroom was dead silent. The lawyers looked at me, clearly expecting me to be in tears. Instead, I calmly dragged the audio file of Gregory's extortion threat onto my desktop. As the CEO of AB Tech Solutions, my company had been in high-level negotiations with Vanguard Capital for the past 3 months. Vanguard desperately needed our revolutionary software interface to prevent their aging systems from collapsing. They had been bending over backward to secure an exclusive contract with my anonymous firm. I opened my corporate email account. I attached the audio file. I typed in the direct email addresses for the CEO of Vanguard Capital, the entire board of directors, and the head of their internal ethics committee. The subject line read, "Formal extortion and money laundering by Senior Portfolio Manager Gregory. Contract negotiations suspended." I hit send. 10 minutes later, inside a glass-walled conference room at Vanguard Capital, Gregory was pacing nervously, waiting for a weekly strategy meeting to begin. His phone suddenly rang. It was the CEO of the company. Gregory picked it up, trying to sound professional. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison. We are just about to start the..." "Pack your belongings and step out of the building," Gregory, the CEO, interrupted, his voice echoing with absolute rage. "Do not touch your computer. Do not touch a single file. Corporate security is on their way up to escort you out. We just received an email from the CEO of AB Tech Solutions containing a recording of you blackmailing a single mother and explicitly outlining fraudulent activities. You are terminated, effective immediately." Gregory felt the color drain from his face. The phone slipped from his hand. Panic consumed him as he realized his entire career was disintegrating in seconds. He lunged toward his laptop, desperately trying to log into his hidden folders to delete the offshore account records linking him to the stolen trust fund money. He frantically hammered the keyboard, sweat pouring down his face. But it was too late. The system had already locked him out. Down in the grand marble-floored lobby of Vanguard Capital, the atmosphere was buzzing with anticipation. Mr. Harrison and the executive board were standing near the revolving glass doors, waiting to personally welcome the elusive CEO of AB Tech Solutions to sign their massive $5 million software agreement. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. I stepped out onto the pavement. I was not wearing my faded thrift store coat or worn-out jeans. I was dressed in a sharp, custom-tailored white power suit that fit flawlessly, paired with Christian Louboutin heels. I adjusted my designer sunglasses, grabbed my sleek leather briefcase, and walked confidently through the revolving doors. Mr. Harrison immediately stepped forward, extending a warm hand. "You must be the founder of AB Tech Solutions. It is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person. Thank you for coming down, despite the unfortunate situation we discussed over email." "The honor is mine, Mr. Harrison," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. Just as we began walking toward the private elevator banks, the lobby echoed with a commotion. 2 massive security guards were dragging a hyperventilating, struggling Gregory toward the front exit. He was clutching a cardboard box of his desk items, looking utterly pathetic. Gregory locked eyes with me. He stopped struggling, his jaw dropping open. He looked at my immaculate white suit, then at the CEO treating me with the utmost respect. His brain struggled to connect the broke, helpless sister-in-law he had just threatened with the powerful tech executive standing in his lobby. Abigail Gregory gasped, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here? How did you get in here?" Mr. Harrison glared at him. "Security, remove this man immediately. He has caused enough damage to this firm." Gregory fought against the guards, his eyes wild with sudden realization. "Wait, you are the CEO. You are AB Tech Solutions. The $5 million contract we have been begging for. That was you." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. I looked him up and down, savoring the absolute ruin in his eyes. "Yes, Gregory?" I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet lobby. "And as for your threat to take my son away, my lawyers have already submitted that recording to the police. Extortion is a felony. Enjoy your time in court." Gregory opened his mouth to scream, but the guards shoved him roughly through the revolving doors, tossing him out onto the cold concrete sidewalk. Before I could turn back to Mr. Harrison to continue our meeting, the heavy glass doors burst open again. Patricia marched into the lobby, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unrestrained fury. She must have rushed over the second Gregory called her in a panic about being fired. She spotted me standing next to the executives. Without a second of hesitation, Patricia charged across the marble floor, raised her hand, and slapped me hard across the face, in front of hundreds of staring employees. "You dare back your brother-in-law into a corner?" The sound of the slap echoed through the massive marble-lined lobby of Vanguard Capital like a gunshot. Hundreds of employees, executives, and security guards froze in their tracks, turning their heads toward the sudden violence. My cheek burned a hot red mark, blooming against my skin, but I did not flinch. I did not raise my hand to touch it. I just slowly turned my head, back to look at my mother. Patricia was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she glared at me with absolute, unfiltered hatred. "You ungrateful little wretch!" she spat, her voice shrill and echoing across the dead quiet room. "Gregory is family. Savannah is your sister. How dare you come in here and destroy his career? Have you no shame?" Mr. Harrison, the CEO of Vanguard Capital, stepped forward immediately, his face flushed with professional outrage. "Madam, I do not care who you are. You cannot assault my business partner in my lobby. Security, restrain this woman."
"Do not touch me!"
Patricia shrieked, swatting at the two massive guards who approached her. She pointed a manicured, trembling finger right at my face. "You all think she is some brilliant executive. She is a fraud. She has always been a destructive, jealous liar. In college, she stole midterms and sold them. She got expelled for being a common thief. I had to spend a fortune to keep the press from finding out and ruining our family name." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the lobby. Gregory, who was still being held near the revolving doors, looked desperately hopeful, thinking my mother might actually save his ruined reputation. I smiled. It was a cold, empty smile that made Patricia take a small, hesitant step back. "You really should have thought this through, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You never could keep your mouth shut when you were losing." I calmly reached into my sleek leather briefcase and pulled out my tablet. I looked up at the massive digital welcome board hanging above the reception desk. It was currently displaying a high-definition welcome graphic for my company celebrating our $5 million partnership. I turned to the CEO. "Mr. Harrison, I believe your lobby display system is connected to the guest presentation network," I said politely. "Do you mind if I cast something to the screen? It seems my mother needs a quick reminder of actual history." Mr. Harrison nodded curtly, gesturing to the IT director who was standing frozen near the front desk. "Give her access immediately." Within seconds, my tablet was synced to the giant screen covering the entire back wall of the lobby. I tapped a secure file, and a scanned document illuminated the room in glaring white light. "Let us talk about that college expulsion," I said, my voice steady and amplified by the sheer silence of the crowd. "I did not steal those exams. Savannah did. She broke into the dean's office because she was failing her business ethics class. She got caught on a hidden security camera." "Lies," Patricia screamed, her eyes darting frantically around the lobby as people stared at her. "You are making this up because you are jealous of her perfect life." I swiped my finger across the tablet. The screen changed to a clear, undeniable still frame from the university security footage. It showed Savannah, unmistakably her, using a hairpin to pick the lock of a filing cabinet in a dark office. When Savannah got caught, you and Richard panicked. I continued pacing slowly in my immaculate white suit. Savannah was your golden child. Her record had to be flawless to marry into high society. So you came to my dorm room. You told me that if I did not take the fall, you would refuse to co-sign my student loans and leave me completely destitute. You forced me to write a fake confession. You let me take the devastating expulsion so your precious Savannah could keep her pristine reputation. The executives watching were openly horrified. Even the security guards looked at Patricia with visible disgust. But that is not even the best part, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, vibrating tone. I swiped to the final slide. A highly detailed bank wire transfer receipt appeared on the massive screen, blowing up the financial figures for everyone to see. You said you spent a fortune to keep the scandal quiet. And you did. You paid the university dean a $50,000 bribe disguised as an anonymous alumni donation to drop the criminal charges against the family. I walked right up to Patricia, invading her personal space until she was forced to step back. But look at the account number that donation came from, Patricia. Look at the routing details. Everyone in the lobby stared at the $50,000 wire transfer. At the very top, the source account was clearly labeled in bold, undeniable print. Beatrice Beneficiary Trust, I read aloud. Account holder, Abigail. Patricia stopped breathing. Her face turned a sickly, terrifying shade of gray. You did not use your own money to cover up Savannah's crime, I stated, making sure every single person in Vanguard Capital heard the absolute truth. You used my stolen trust fund money to pay the bribe for the crime you forced me to take the fall for. You made me pay for my own wrongful expulsion. The silence in the lobby was absolute and deafening. Mr. Harrison shook his head in absolute disgust, stepping completely away from my mother. Gregory, seeing the undeniable proof of the stolen trust fund displayed on a 50-foot screen at his former workplace, finally broke down. He collapsed onto the pavement outside the revolving doors, sobbing uncontrollably. He knew the paper trail was exposed. He knew he was going to federal prison. You are a monster, Patricia whispered, tears of utter humiliation finally spilling down her heavily made-up face. You are trying to destroy us. I am just presenting the accounting, I replied coldly. Numbers do not lie, Patricia. But you do. Realizing she had completely lost the narrative, Patricia covered her face with her designer handbag. She let out a high-pitched wail of absolute embarrassment, shoved past the security guards, and ran out the sliding glass doors into the bustling Boston street. She left Gregory crying on the concrete behind her, abandoning her son-in-law the second he was no longer useful. I watched her run, knowing this was far from over. Patricia was a severe narcissist, and narcissists do not retreat when they are caught. They rebrand. As Patricia frantically hailed a cab to escape the humiliating scene at Vanguard Capital, her hands were shaking so violently she could barely hold her phone. But even through her panic, her twisted mind was already calculating a desperate counterattack. She dialed the number for her elite public relations manager. "Listen to me," Patricia hissed into the phone as the cab sped away from the financial district. "The situation is a total disaster. Abigail is trying to ruin the family name. We need to flip the narrative before she leaks anything to the Boston social circuit. I want you to book the grand ballroom at the Plaza for this Saturday night. Spare no expense." She wiped her ruined makeup with the back of her hand, her eyes hardening with malicious intent. "We are going to host a massive charity gala. Invite the mayor, invite the board members, invite every billionaire in the city. We will announce a massive charitable donation to prove we are upstanding citizens. We will paint Abigail as a mentally unstable, jealous daughter trying to extort us. I will bury her so deep under a mountain of good press, she will never see the light of day again." She gripped her phone tightly, a sinister, self-satisfied smile returning to her face. She actually thought a lavish party and a fake charitable donation could wash away decades of theft and abuse. She thought she could buy her way out of federal crimes. She had absolutely no idea that I had already anticipated her exact move, and I was holding a VIP invitation of my own. Saturday night arrived with a bitter chill, but inside the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, the atmosphere was suffocatingly warm. Patricia had moved with desperate, terrified speed. In less than a week, she had organized a lavish charity gala, pulling every string and cashing in every favor she had left in the city. To guarantee the attendance of Boston's absolute elite, she had prominently plastered my grandmother's name across the invitations. It was a brilliant, disgusting lie. Beatrice had explicitly refused to attend, but Patricia knew the billionaires, politicians, and socialites would flock to any event bearing the legendary real estate mogul's name. They were using a charity event to scrub clean the massive stain I had left on their public image. I pulled up to the valet in a sleek black town car. I stepped out wearing a floor-length emerald green gown, completely unbranded, but custom-tailored to fit me flawlessly. I wore no flashy diamonds and carried no oversized designer logos, just quiet, undeniable authority. As I walked up the red-carpeted steps toward the massive double doors, I spotted them. Savannah and Gregory were stationed near the velvet ropes, playing the role of high society greeters. Gregory looked hollowed out. Fired, publicly humiliated, and facing federal charges, he was clinging to this gala as his very last shred of relevance. Savannah was dressed in a loud silver-sequined dress, trying desperately to project her usual arrogant confidence. When Savannah saw me approaching, her fake camera-ready smile vanished instantly. It was replaced by an ugly, panicked sneer. She immediately stepped right into my path, aggressively signaling a burly security guard to block the entrance. "What do you think you are doing here?" Savannah demanded, keeping her voice low and venomous so the passing VIP guests would not hear. "This is an exclusive charity gala, Abigail, not a soup kitchen. You cannot just walk in off the street." Gregory stepped up beside her, crossing his arms, trying to look intimidating, despite the fear sweating out of his pores. "Security will escort you off the property right now," he hissed. "You have done enough damage to this family. We are not letting you ruin tonight. We are raising millions for children." "You mean you are using a children's charity as a human shield to hide your federal crimes?" I replied evenly, not breaking stride. "Now step aside." Savannah let out a harsh, grating laugh. "Step aside. You are completely delusional. You do not belong in a room like this. Tickets were $10,000 a plate. I know, for an absolute fact, your bank account is empty because I maxed out your only credit card myself. Where is your invitation? Did you forge one in your little apartment?" I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I simply opened my sleek leather clutch. I bypassed the standard white paper invitations that everyone else in line was holding. Instead, I reached in and pulled out a heavy, solid brass card. The metal gleamed under the entrance lights. It was the exclusive gold VIP pass, a tier reserved strictly for the top financial backers of the event. I held it up right in front of Savannah's face. Her eyes darted down to the engraved black lettering. "Diamond sponsor," I read aloud, making sure the security guard standing next to us saw it clearly. "CEO of AB Tech Solutions." Savannah's jaw dropped open. The blood drained completely from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale under the bright lights. She stared at the heavy brass card, then at my immaculate emerald gown, and finally at my calm face. Her brain desperately tried to process the reality that her broke, scapegoat sister was the anonymous multimillionaire tech founder who had single-handedly funded the highest tier of their desperate charity event. Gregory staggered back a step, as if I had physically struck him in the chest. His eyes were wide with pure terror. The security guard, Instantly recognizing the diamond sponsor pass, quickly unclipped the velvet rope and bowed his head respectfully. "Right this way, ma'am," the guard said, gesturing toward the doors. I did not even look back at Savannah or Gregory as I walked through the heavy mahogany entrance. They were frozen on the steps, utterly paralyzed by the crushing weight of their own insignificance. The ballroom inside was spectacular. Massive crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across dozens of tables draped in white silk. Waiters in crisp tuxedos circulated with silver trays of expensive champagne. I navigated through the dense crowd of Boston's wealthiest elites, moving steadily toward the very front of the stage. The room was buzzing with whispered gossip, much of it undoubtedly about the explosive scandal at Vanguard Capital. Patricia and Richard had bet every last dime of their social capital on this night to wash away the stench of my revelations. At the center of the stage, standing behind a polished acrylic podium, was my father. Richard was sweating slightly under the hot stage lights, but he projected his usual commanding, arrogant aura. He tapped the microphone, calling the massive room to order. The chatter died down as all eyes turned to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard boomed his voice, echoing through the silent ballroom. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate family legacy and the future. Recent vicious rumors have tried to cast shadows on our good family name, but we believe actions speak far louder than whispers." He paused dramatically, looking out over the sea of wealthy investors, judges, and politicians. He puffed out his chest, ready to deliver his masterstroke of public relations. To prove our unwavering commitment to this community and to absolute moral integrity, Richard announced, a wide, triumphant smile spreading across his face. "My family and I are personally pledging a direct donation of $2 million to the Boston Children's Fund." The applause that erupted in the grand ballroom was deafening. Boston's elite rose in standing ovation for the man who had just promised a fortune to sick children. Richard stood behind the polished acrylic podium, soaking in the adoration. He placed his hand over his heart, projecting the perfect image of a benevolent patriarch. In the front row, Patricia wiped a single, perfectly calculated tear from her cheek. They actually believed they had won. They thought this $2 million pledge would scrub their names clean, bury the Vanguard Capital scandal, and reestablish their dominance in high society. I stepped out from the shadows of the diamond sponsor table and walked directly down the center aisle. The heavy fabric of my emerald green gown swept quietly across the carpet. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, measured pace of an executioner. A few guests noticed me and parted ways, their eyes drawn to the quiet authority I commanded. As I approached the front of the room, Savannah and Gregory, who had somehow managed to sneak inside the ballroom, spotted me from the back. Savannah grabbed Gregory's arm, her mouth dropping open in sheer panic as she realized the security guards had not thrown me out. I reached the carpeted steps leading up to the stage. Richard was still waving to the crowd, blinding camera flashes illuminating his triumphant smile. He did not see me until my heel clicked against the wooden floorboards of the stage itself. He turned his head, expecting to see a gala organizer or a waiter bringing him a fresh glass of water. When he saw me standing there, his triumphant smile froze into a grotesque mask of horror. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. I walked straight up to the podium, stepping directly into the bright glare of the stage lights. "Get off this stage right now," Richard hissed through clenched teeth, keeping his voice barely above a whisper so the microphones would not pick it up. He maintained his rigid, frozen smile for the hundreds of cameras pointing at us. "Security is going to drag you out of here by your hair. You are trespassing." "I am the diamond sponsor, Richard," I whispered back, my voice as cold as the winter air outside. "I bought stage." Before he could process what that meant, I smoothly reached out and pulled the microphone from his sweating hand. He gripped the metal for a fraction of a second, his knuckles turning white, but he could not wrestle me for it without causing a physical scene in front of the mayor and the city's billionaires. He released it, his eyes burning with a murderous rage. I turned to the sea of wealthy investors, politicians, and socialites. The applause slowly died down, replaced by a ripple of curious whispers. They recognized me as the woman from the Vanguard Capitol lobby incident. But they also recognized me as the anonymous multimillionaire tech founder who had funded tonight's highest sponsorship tier. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice echoing crystal clear through the massive ballroom speakers. I smiled warmly, projecting a radiant confidence that made my father physically tremble beside me. "My name is Abigail, CEO of AB Tech Solutions. It is truly inspiring to see Richard stand up here and pledge $2 million to the Boston Children's Fund. It is a beautiful gesture. Transparency and generosity are the cornerstones of any lasting family legacy." Richard shifted his weight, his breathing turning shallow and erratic. "Shut your mouth," he muttered under his breath, leaning close to me. "I swear to God, Abigail, shut up." I ignored him entirely. I looked past the sea of tables, past the confused faces of the board members, and locked eyes with the lead audiovisual technician standing in the control booth at the back of the room. I had visited the hotel early this morning. I had paid the technical crew a massive premium to bypass the gala organizers' approved run of show. They worked for me tonight. I raised my free hand and gave a crisp, deliberate nod to the booth. Because transparency is so important, I continued my voice, commanding the absolute attention of every single person in the room. I felt it was only right to share a special presentation tonight, a behind-the-scenes look at exactly how this family manages its incredible wealth and exactly where that $2 million donation is coming from. The bright stage lights instantly cut out, plunging Richard and me into shadow. The massive 40-foot projector screen suspended behind us suddenly crackled to life. The audience murmured in anticipation, expecting a heartwarming video montage of sick children or a timeline of Richard's corporate success. Instead, the screen displayed a high-definition, covertly recorded video call. The timestamp in the corner showed it was recorded exactly 3 years ago. On the left side of the screen sat Gregory, wearing his Vanguard Capital tailored suit, sitting in his old executive office. On the right side of the screen was Richard, sitting in the very study I had grown up terrified to enter. The video was part of the digital cache my forensic accountants had legally recovered from Gregory's seized work laptop. The audio pumped through the plaza's state-of-the-art surround sound system, making every word undeniable and deafening. "The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands are fully operational," Gregory's voice boomed through the ballroom. The video showed him tapping a pen against his desk, looking incredibly smug. "Beatrice's $500,000 monthly trust fund deposit is routing cleanly through the shell companies. We are completely invisible to the IRS." A collective gasp ripped through the audience. The mayor of Boston, sitting at the front table, slowly lowered his champagne glass to the table. The wealthy elites who had just applauded Richard's morality stared at the screen in absolute shock. Richard's voice echoed next his face, massive on the screen. "Make sure Patricia's name is kept entirely off the Cayman transfer logs. Take your 20% management fee for washing the funds and filter the rest directly into our primary domestic accounts. Classify it as aggressive real estate yields." "What about Abigail Gregory?" asked on the recording, laughing cruelly. "Are you worried she might ask where her grandmother's money is going?" On the massive screen, Richard let out a loud, arrogant scoff. "Abigail is a broke, pathetic failure. She is too stupid to even know the trust exists, let alone ask for an audit. Keep draining the accounts, Gregory. We need the liquid cash to cover Savannah's credit card bills and my new yacht." The video froze on Richard's arrogant, laughing face. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute, heavy, and lethal. For 5 agonizing seconds, no one breathed. Then pure chaos erupted. It started as a low rumble of disgust and quickly escalated into shouting. Investors who had trusted Richard with their money jumped to their feet, their faces red with fury. Board members of the charity foundation looked physically sick, realizing they had just publicly aligned themselves with federal criminals who stole from their own family to buy luxury boats. They knew the promised $2 million donation was nothing but laundered, stolen blood money. Camera flashes exploded like a strobe light, capturing the exact moment the great family empire crumbled into dust. Savannah screamed from the back of the room, covering her face, as people around her stepped away in sheer revulsion. Patricia, still in the front row, slumped forward in her chair, hyperventilating as the weight of federal prison suddenly became a reality. I stood calmly in the shadows of the stage, watching the destruction unfold. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I let the noise of their ruin wash over me. I turned to look at my father. Richard's mind had completely snapped. The polished, commanding executive was gone. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely feral. His jaw trembled uncontrollably as he looked at the massive screen, then at the disgusted crowd, and finally at me. He had lost his money, his freedom, and his reputation in a matter of seconds. "You?" Richard roared, a guttural, animalistic sound that tore from the depths of his throat. He completely lost his mind. With a scream of absolute, unhinged fury, my father lunged at me. He threw his entire body weight forward, his hands curled into violent claws, aiming directly for my throat. Richard's hands were inches from my throat when a massive force slammed into him from the side. He never even touched me. The lead security guard my grandmother had hired moved with terrifying speed. He tackled my father to the polished wooden floorboards of the stage, twisting Richard's arm sharply behind his back. A second guard immediately stepped in, driving his knee into my father's spine, pinning him completely flat. Richard let out a muffled grunt of pain, his expensive, tailored suit instantly ruined against the hard floor. He thrashed like a wild animal, his face pressed against the wood, spitting out violent curses that echoed through the stunned silence of the room. I did not take a single step back. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the man who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. Now he was the one writhing on the ground, humiliated, in front of the most powerful people in Boston. The man who had threatened to steal my baby just a week ago was currently pinned to the floor by men I had paid to be there. Patricia, realizing her husband had just attacked me in front of hundreds of witnesses, let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She scrambled up the stage steps, her designer gown tangling around her legs. She did not rush to check if I was hurt. She did not even look at me. She went straight for the microphone I had left on the podium. "Listen to me," Patricia screamed into the microphone, her voice echoing wildly across the grand ballroom. "Do not believe a single thing you just saw. That video is entirely fake. It is a fabrication." The ballroom went dead quiet. The wealthy investors and charity board members stared at her in absolute shock. "My daughter is mentally unstable," Patricia continued, pointing a shaking finger at me while tears streamed down her perfectly contoured face. "She works in technology. She knows how to manipulate computers. That video is an AI deepfake. She generated it to frame my husband and my son-in-law because she is insanely jealous of Savannah's perfect life. She wants to destroy the charity and steal our family legacy." It was a desperate, pathetic lie. But Patricia delivered it with the manic conviction of a cornered animal. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. AI technology was advancing rapidly, and deep fakes were a known threat in the corporate world. Patricia was banking on the technical ignorance of the older billionaires in the room, hoping she could plant just enough doubt to save her crumbling social status. She fell to her knees beside Richard, who was still pinned to the stage by the security guards. She wept loudly, begging the crowd for sympathy. "Look at what she is doing to her own father! We gave her everything, and this is how she repays us? She is a monster. We are innocent. We have dedicated our lives to this community. We are pledging $2 million to sick children tonight. Why would we steal?" Savannah suddenly appeared at the edge of the stage, taking her mother's cue. She started sobbing loudly, burying her face in Gregory's chest. Gregory, however, looked completely petrified. Being a finance broker, he knew exactly what the audio in that video meant. He knew the paper trail existed, and he knew a deepfake excuse would never hold up against a forensic audit. His eyes darted around the room, searching for the nearest exit. I slowly walked over to Patricia. I looked down at her theatrical tears. I did not need to raise my voice. I spoke directly and clearly, making sure the entire room heard every word. "You are pathetic, Patricia," I said coldly. "You think a room full of elite investors will believe in AI deepfake-generated bank routing numbers that perfectly match the Cayman Island accounts your husband opened 3 years ago? I do not need to fake a video to prove you are a thief. The Vanguard Capital forensic accounting team already verified the transfers. They terminated Gregory yesterday morning." The crowd gasped again. Patricia's eyes darted frantically around the room, realizing her lie was completely falling apart. She opened her mouth to scream another excuse, to hurl another insult at me, but she never got the chance. A deafening crash echoed from the back of the room. The massive, heavy, mahogany double doors of the grand ballroom were kicked violently open. They slammed against the walls with a force that made the crystal chandeliers rattle. The murmurs in the crowd instantly ceased. Marching through the doors was a tactical team of men and women wearing dark windbreakers. The bold yellow letters on their jackets read FBI and IRS Criminal Investigation Division. There were at least a dozen of them, moving with absolute coordinated precision. They bypassed the velvet ropes, ignored the shocked event organizers, and walked directly down the center aisle toward the stage. The lead agent, a tall, imposing woman with a steely expression, held a thick stack of manila folders in her hand. She did not look impressed by the emerald gowns, the silk tuxedos, or the billions of dollars of net worth sitting in the room. Richard Wilson and Patricia Wilson, the lead agent, announced, her voice booming with unquestionable authority. "You are both under arrest for federal tax evasion, wire fraud, and grand larceny." Patricia froze. The microphone slipped from her hand and clattered loudly against the stage floor. Her face turned the color of ash. Richard stopped struggling against the security guards, his entire body going limp with sheer terror. Gregory, standing near the edge of the stage, realized what was happening. He panicked. He let go of Savannah and turned to run toward the catering exit at the side of the ballroom. "Stop right there, Gregory," a second federal agent shouted, intercepting him before he could take more than 3 steps. The agent grabbed Gregory by the shoulder and shoved him hard against the wall, quickly pulling out a pair of steel handcuffs. "You are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering and corporate embezzlement," Savannah shrieked as the federal agent slapped the cuffs onto her husband's wrists. Gregory began to cry actual, pathetic tears, begging the agents to listen to him, promising he would testify against my father if they just cut him a deal. In less than 10 seconds, he was ready to sell out the entire family to save his own skin. He babbled about how Richard forced him to set up the shadow trusts, screaming that he was just following orders. The lead FBI agent climbed the steps to the stage. She looked at Beatrice's security guards, who immediately stepped back, allowing the federal agents to haul Richard roughly to his feet. They pulled his arms behind his back and locked the handcuffs in place. Patricia tried to crawl away, her designer gown snagging on the wooden floorboards. "No," she whimpered. holding her hands up defensively as an agent approached her. "Please, there is a mistake. I do not know anything about offshore accounts. My husband handles the finances. I just host the parties. I am innocent." "Save it for the judge, ma'am," the agent replied coldly, securing the cuffs tightly around Patricia's wrists. "We have your signature on 24 different shell company transfer authorizations." They hauled my mother to her feet. She looked completely broken, stripped of all her arrogance and false elegance. As they marched her toward the edge of the stage, she turned her head and locked eyes with me. Her expression was a toxic mixture of absolute shock and burning hatred. She realized, finally and completely, that I had orchestrated this entire sequence of events. I had not just exposed them to their friends. I had handed them directly to the federal government. "Take them out," the lead agent ordered, gesturing toward the doors. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, completely silent as the elite Boston socialites watched the Wilson family get paraded down the center aisle in handcuffs. Camera flashes from the few journalists who had managed to sneak into the charity gala exploded relentlessly, capturing the ultimate downfall of my abusers. Savannah was left standing completely alone at the bottom of the stage steps. Her husband was gone, her parents were gone, her stolen wealth was gone. She looked up at me, her face pale and trembling. She had spent her entire life stepping on me, taking credit for my sacrifices and stealing my resources. Now she had absolutely nothing. I stood under the bright stage lights, adjusting my emerald green gown. I looked at Savannah, offering her a slow, razor-thin smile. "I told you, Savannah," I said softly, my voice carrying just enough for her to hear. "I always settle my debts." Savannah opened her mouth to speak, but another group of investigators rushed into the ballroom, holding a separate warrant for the seizure of all personal assets linked to the Vanguard capital fraud. One of the investigators walked directly up to Savannah. "Ma'am," the investigator stated, holding out an evidence bag, "we have a seizure order for all assets purchased with the stolen funds. Take off the diamond necklace." Savannah clutched her throat, stepping back in absolute horror. "No!" she cried out, her voice cracking. "This was an anniversary gift! You cannot take this!" "Take it off, or I will remove it for you," the investigator warned, stepping closer. Humiliated and weeping openly, Savannah fumbled with the clasp at the back of her neck. She dropped the heavy, glittering diamonds into the plastic evidence bag. Her entire fake life, built entirely on the money they had stolen from my son, was being stripped away, piece by piece, in front of everyone she had ever tried to impress. As the heavy steel doors of the federal transport van slammed shut, Richard and Gregory were hauled to isolated interrogation rooms at the FBI field office. They faced decades in federal prison for wire fraud, tax evasion, and corporate embezzlement. Patricia tried one final escape. The moment the handcuffs closed around her wrists, she clutched her chest and collapsed, claiming a cardiac emergency. Paramedics transported her to a secured hospital ward under federal guard. Doctors cleared her the following afternoon. Because prosecutors were still finalizing the money laundering indictment, a magistrate granted her temporary pretrial release under electronic monitoring, passport surrender, and strict travel restrictions. Savannah collected her after discharge. The release did not erase the charges, it merely gave Patricia a narrow window before arraignment, and she immediately used it to organize one last family pressure campaign. 2 days later, reality set in. The government had frozen every single bank account associated with my father. Savannah's credit cards were entirely declined. Desperation turns toxic people into dangerous, unpredictable animals. Patricia knew she needed millions in liquid cash to hire the elite defense attorneys required to keep Richard from dying in a federal penitentiary. And she knew exactly where the only untouched fortune remained: my grandmother's trust fund. Patricia and Savannah frantically organized an emergency extended family assembly. They summoned every aunt, uncle, and influential cousin to my Uncle Frank's sprawling estate in Connecticut. Patricia sent out hysterical messages, claiming the family legacy was under a lethal attack and begging Beatrice to attend. I rode to the estate in the back of Beatrice's chauffeured car. My grandmother sat beside me, dressed in an immaculate charcoal suit, resting her hands on her silver cane. She did not say a word the entire drive, but the cold determination in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. We walked through the heavy double doors of Uncle Frank's grand dining room. 30 of my relatives were seated around a massive, polished oak table. The room was buzzing with anxious, hushed whispers. Patricia and Savannah sat at the far end. They had completely abandoned their designer gowns and flashy jewelry, dressing instead in plain dark clothing to play the role of absolute victims. When I stepped into the room, the whispers abruptly stopped. The glare of pure hatred for my extended family was blinding. Patricia did not waste a single second. She stood up, tears streaming down her pale face, and pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "Look at her!" Patricia cried out, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Look at the monster we raised. She is a traitor to her own blood. She orchestrated this entire nightmare to destroy her own father." Savannah immediately buried her face in a tissue, sobbing loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "She is an ungrateful parasite," Savannah wailed. "She used her technology company to fabricate bank transfers. She generated fake audio recordings to frame Gregory and Dad. She is just insanely jealous of my life and my marriage, so she decided to burn our entire family to the ground." The aunts and uncles murmured in agreement, casting disgusted looks in my direction. They were so conditioned to view me as the family failure that Patricia's ridiculous lies actually made sense to them. Uncle Frank slammed his hand on the table, demanding I answer for my supposed crimes. They could not fathom that the great Richard Wilson was a common thief. It was much easier to believe that the scapegoat daughter had finally lost her mind. Patricia walked around the oak table, approaching Beatrice with her hands clasped together in a begging motion. "Mother, you have to see the truth," Patricia pleaded, dropping to her knees beside Beatrice's chair. "Abigail is a vicious, white-eyed wolf. We fed her, housed her, and loved her, and she turned around and bit the hand that provided for her. You must disinherit her immediately. You have to strip her of that trust fund and transfer the assets to my control. It is the only way we can afford the legal team to save Richard. If you do not give us that money, your own son will die in a federal prison because of her psychotic lies." I stood quietly near the doorway, watching the pathetic, cowardly blame game unfold. I did not flinch. I did not bother defending myself against their absurd deepfake theories. I just looked at my grandmother, waiting for the storm I knew she was about to unleash. Beatrice looked down at Patricia, kneeling on the expensive rug. Her expression was utterly devoid of sympathy. She slowly rose from her chair, her presence instantly commanding absolute silence in the grand room. Beatrice reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope. She did not hand it to Patricia. Instead, she raised it high and slammed it down onto the center of the solid oak table. The sharp smack of the paper echoed like a gunshot. "You want to talk about traitors, Patricia Beatrice?" asked, her voice dropping to a lethal, vibrating register. "You want to talk about parasites draining this family's legacy?" For months, I had my private investigators digging into every single financial record Richard tried to bury. But forensic accountants do not just find hidden offshore bank accounts. Sometimes they uncover the disgusting, filthy secrets you thought you buried decades ago. Patricia froze. The theatrical tears stopped instantly. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a hollowed-out corpse. She stared at the manila envelope on the table as if it were a live explosive. "What is that?" Uncle Frank asked, breaking the heavy silence. "It is a certified DNA report," Beatrice announced, her eyes locked onto Patricia's terrified face. I commissioned it through an accredited private laboratory for this exact purpose. Savannah, open it and tell the family what it says." Savannah hesitated, her hands trembling violently as she reached for the envelope. She pulled out the single sheet of medical paper. Her eyes scanning the black text, she gasped, dropping the paper onto the oak wood as if it had burned her fingers. Beatrice leaned forward, her silver cane resting firmly against the floorboards. "The test proves exactly what you have been hiding for 28 years, Patricia. Savannah does not share a single drop of Wilson blood. She is not Richard's daughter." The single sheet of medical paper lay on the solid oak table, but it might as well have been an active explosive. The silence in Uncle Frank's grand dining room was absolute and suffocating. Savannah stared at the black ink, her perfectly manicured hands, trembling so violently she had to grip the edge of the heavy table to keep from collapsing. "She is lying!" Patricia shrieked, breaking the silence with a desperate, ear-piercing scream. She lunged forward, trying to snatch the document away, but one of Beatrice's security guards stepped smoothly into her path, blocking her completely. "It is a fake. Abigail paid someone to print that. She is trying to poison this family against us." Beatrice did not blink. She leaned forward, resting both hands on her silver cane, her eyes locking onto Patricia with the cold, calculating gaze of an apex predator. "Do not insult my intelligence, Patricia," she said. "Richard and Savannah voluntarily submitted genetic samples the previous year for a hereditary health screening I funded for the family. Their signed consent forms authorized comparative testing. The accredited Swiss laboratory preserved a documented chain of custody, and a second independent laboratory repeated the analysis. There is no stolen medical record, no contaminated sample, and no margin for error." Patricia stepped back, her face turning a sickly shade of gray. She opened her mouth to argue, to spin another elaborate web of lies, but no sound came out. "His name was Arthur Vance," Beatrice announced, dropping the final piece of the puzzle onto the table. "He was a fast-talking scammer running a Ponzi scheme out of Rhode Island. 7 years into your marriage, during a 6-month separation from Richard, you began an affair with him. When investigators closed in, Vance fled the country and left you pregnant. You reconciled with Richard, lied about the timing, and allowed him to believe Savannah was his daughter." A collective gasp swept through the extended family. Uncle Frank's jaw dropped open. The aunts and cousins who had just been glaring at me with absolute hatred were now staring at Patricia with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You needed a savior," Beatrice continued, stripping away the last shreds of my mother's dignity. "You needed a wealthy, arrogant fool who cared more about his public image than asking difficult questions. So you trapped Richard. You convinced him the child was his, you let him raise another man's bastard, and you spent the next 28 years forcing him to fund her extravagant lifestyle, using money stolen from my biological great-grandson." Savannah let out a gut-wrenching sob. She looked at Patricia, her eyes wide with horror. Savannah gasped, her voice cracking. "Tell her she is lying. Tell them it is a lie." Patricia could not look her daughter in the eye. She stared at the oak floorboards, her entire body shaking, tears of absolute humiliation ruining her makeup. That silence was the only confirmation Savannah needed. The golden child, the perfect daughter, the heir to the social throne, was nothing more than a fraud, born from a criminal. Uncle Frank stood up at the head of the table. His face was red with fury. "Get out of my house," he ordered, pointing a trembling finger toward the heavy double doors. "Both of you, get your things and get off my property. You are a disgrace to the Wilson name." Patricia fell to her knees on the expensive Persian rug. "Frank, please," she begged, holding her hands out to her brother-in-law. "I have nowhere to go. The government froze our accounts. My credit cards are declining. Please, you have to help us. I will call the police if you are not gone in 2 minutes, Uncle Frank replied coldly, turning his back on her entirely. While Patricia and Savannah were being thrown out of the estate into the cold afternoon air, a very different kind of nightmare was unfolding inside the federal holding facility downtown. Richard was sitting in a sterile, windowless interrogation room. He was wearing a faded orange jumpsuit, a far cry from his custom-tailored Italian suits. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot from 2 days of sheer terror and zero sleep. The heavy steel door clicked open, and his high-priced defense attorney, Charles, walked in. Charles did not look optimistic. He did not carry a bail agreement or a plea deal. He carried a single manila folder. Richard leaned forward eagerly, his hands cuffed to the metal table. Charles, tell me you got the accounts unfrozen. Tell me Patricia wired the retainer. I cannot stay in this place another night. You have to get me out of here. Charles sat down slowly. He placed the folder on the metal table and slid it across to my father. Patricia did not wire anything, Richard. Every single account linked to your name, her name, and the Shadow Trusts has been seized by the IRS. You have absolutely zero liquid assets. But that is not why I am here. Richard frowned, his hands trembling as he reached for the folder. What is this? Your mother's legal team sent it to my office an hour ago, Charles said softly, looking away. They said you needed to see it immediately. Richard flipped the folder open. He stared at the certified medical letterhead. He read the genetic markers. He read the final, undeniable conclusion printed in bold black ink. Probability of paternity, 0%. The color completely drained from Richard's face. The paper slipped from his shaking fingers. His eyes darted rapidly across the metal table, his mind desperately trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. 35 years of marriage. 28 years of raising a daughter he thought was his own. He had poured millions of dollars into Savannah's education, her luxury cars, her massive wedding. He had actively destroyed his relationship with me, his only actual biological child, to protect Savannah's feelings. He had committed federal wire fraud. He had laundered stolen money. He had risked decades in a maximum security prison. He had thrown away his entire life, his legacy, and his freedom to protect a golden child who did not share a single drop of his blood. He had ruined his real daughter to fund a scammer's bastard. Richard's breathing suddenly became shallow and erratic. He gasped, his hands flying up to clutch the center of his chest. His eyes bulged in absolute terror as a massive, crushing pressure radiated through his torso and down his left arm. Richard Charles shouted, jumping out of his chair as my father slumped heavily against the metal table. My father tried to speak, but only a wet, choked gasp escaped his lips. The sheer shock, combined with the stress of the federal indictment, was too much for his heart to bear. He collapsed sideways, hitting the concrete floor of the interrogation room. The heavy steel door flew open as guards and medical personnel rushed in, shouting orders, but Richard was already losing consciousness. His final thoughts consumed by the crushing realization that his entire life was a lie. By the next morning, the fallout was absolute and devastating. With Richard recovering under heavy guard in the prison ward of the local hospital, Patricia was left entirely defenseless. The IRS agents had arrived at her massive suburban estate and formally locked the doors, seizing the property and everything inside it. Savannah had abandoned her mother immediately. Realizing Patricia was completely broke and facing criminal accessory charges, Savannah packed whatever designer clothes she had left in her car and drove away without a single word of comfort, proving that her loyalty only extended as far as my mother's credit limit. Patricia was homeless. She had no cash, no assets, no husband to protect her, and a family that had entirely disowned her. I was sitting in my executive office on the top floor of AB Tech Solutions. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the Boston skyline. I was reviewing the final integration contracts for the Vanguard Capital deal when my secure desk phone chimed. Miss Wilson, my executive assistant, said her voice, carrying a note of deep concern. There is a woman in the main lobby. She bypassed the primary security desk and is causing a massive scene. She is demanding to see you. She says she is your mother. Security is asking if they should call the police. I leaned back in my leather chair, a slow, cold realization washing over me. Patricia had hit rock bottom. No, I said calmly, never taking my eyes off the city skyline. Do not call the police. Send her up. Send her directly to my office. 5 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of my office swung open. I barely recognized the woman standing in the doorway. Patricia's perfectly styled hair was a tangled, greasy mess. Her designer clothes were wrinkled and stained. The arrogant, wealthy socialite who had demanded I sit in the kitchen during her anniversary party just 2 weeks ago was completely gone. She stood there staring at the sheer scale of my wealth. She looked at the imported marble floors, the massive mahogany desk, the modern art on the walls. She looked at me, sitting powerfully behind the desk in a custom-tailored suit. Patricia took 2 trembling steps into the office. Her knees gave out. She collapsed onto the floor, the sound of her knees hitting the hardwood echoing loudly in the quiet room. She bowed her head, pressing her forehead almost to the floor, her shoulders shaking with violent, pathetic sobs. Abigail Patricia wept, her voice a broken, desperate rasp. Abigail, please. I have nothing. They took everything. Savannah left me. Your father is dying in a prison hospital. I am sleeping in my car. Please, you have to stop this. You have to give me something. You have so much money. You are my daughter. Please have mercy on me. I looked down at the woman who had made my childhood a living nightmare. Patricia was clutching the edge of my heavy mahogany desk, her knuckles stark white, her tears staining the expensive imported rug beneath her knees. She was waiting for me to break. She was waiting for the obedient, desperate daughter inside me to rush forward, lift her up, and hand over a blank check to save her from ruin. Stand up, Patricia. You are embarrassing yourself. She sobbed louder, throwing her head back in a theatrical display of agony. Please, Abigail, I am your mother. You cannot let me live on the streets. They took everything. You have millions. Just a small fraction of your wealth could fix all of this. You were my warden, I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of warmth. You did not come here because you love me, or because you feel a single ounce of remorse for the decades of abuse you inflicted upon me. You came here because the federal government froze your stolen accounts, and you cannot afford a luxury hotel. You are not sorry you stole my future. You are just terrified of being poor. Patricia's wails faltered. She looked up, her tear-streaked face freezing as she realized that Pity Act was utterly useless against me. The transition was horrifying and fascinating to watch. Within seconds, the weeping, broken mother completely vanished. Patricia slowly pushed herself off the floor. She smoothed down her ruined designer skirt, her spine straightening, her eyes hardening into shards of absolute ice. You always were a cold, ungrateful wretch, Patricia hissed, her true voice returning, sharp and venomous. I should have known better than to expect basic decency from you. You have a heart made of stone. Basic decency? I asked, leaning forward on my desk, my eyes locked onto hers. Like stealing my scholarship money? Like forging violent syndicate loan documents to extort me? Like threatening to call Child Protective Services to steal my baby just to protect your thieving golden child? Get out of my office before I call building security to throw you onto the street. Patricia did not move toward the door. Instead, a wicked, triumphant smile spread across her face. It was the exact same sickening smile she wore when she forced me to take the fall for Savannah's college theft years ago. She crossed her arms, her posture reeking of arrogant confidence. "You really think you have won?" Patricia sneered, pacing slowly in front of my desk. "You think you can send my husband to a prison hospital, seize my home, and leave me sleeping in a rented car without facing any consequences? You think your millions and your fancy executive title make you untouchable?" I stared at her, completely unfazed by her posturing. "They certainly make me untouchable by you." Maybe Patricia laughed a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the glass walls of my office. "But you have a massive weak spot, Abigail. A tiny, crying, helpless weak spot that you would give up every single dollar in your bank account to protect." My blood ran completely cold. The air in the room suddenly felt entirely too thin to breathe. "Leo, do not even breathe his name," I warned, my voice dropping to a lethal vibrating register. "I do not have to," Patricia mocked, her eyes alight with malicious joy. "You see, when the IRS agents were raiding my house, I realized I needed an absolute insurance policy. If my own daughter was going to ruin my life, I needed to make sure I ruined hers right back. I needed leverage. So I did some digging and I made a very important phone call." She leaned over my desk, invading my space. "I called Julian." The name hit me like a physical strike to the chest. Julian was Leo's biological father. The man who had packed his bags and walked out of our apartment the exact minute I showed him a positive pregnancy test. He had told me I was a suffocating burden, that he refused to ruin his youth paying for a crying infant, and that I should get an abortion. I had not heard a single word from him in nearly a year. I had raised my son entirely alone. "What did you do?" I demanded, my hands balling into tight fists. "I simply caught him up on current events," Patricia smiled brightly, looking incredibly pleased with herself. "Julian was living in a cramped studio apartment, working a dead-end sales job, completely unaware that his pathetic, broke ex-girlfriend was actually the anonymous CEO of a highly lucrative tech enterprise. He had absolutely no idea his infant son was the direct heir to a massive fortune." "You told a deadbeat father about my money." "I told a desperate man how to get incredibly rich." Patricia corrected me. "I told him that family court heavily favors biological fathers who want to be involved, especially when the mother is a busy, stressed executive with a history of family instability. I told him that if he filed for emergency full custody, you would be so absolutely terrified of losing your baby that you would pay him millions just to go away. And, naturally, Julian agreed to give me 30% of whatever he extorts from you as a finder's fee. He abandoned his child," I stated, my anger boiling over into pure rage. "No judge on earth will give him custody. He did not abandon anyone." A new, sickeningly familiar voice echoed through the room. I whipped my head toward the doorway. The heavy oak doors of my office had swung wide open. Standing there, wearing a cheap suit that did not fit properly and a smug, arrogant grin, was Julian. He had not changed at all. He still lived exactly like the coward who had abandoned me when I needed him most. But standing right next to him was a man who made my stomach twist into knots. He wore a slick pinstripe suit and carried a battered leather briefcase. He had the unmistakable aura of a bottom-feeding defense attorney, the exact kind of lawyer who specialized in dragging families through years of grueling, traumatic litigation just to rack up billable hours and force massive settlements. Julian was simply going through a temporary financial hardship, the slimy lawyer announced, stepping right into my immaculate office without an invitation. He needed time to establish a suitable, safe environment for his beloved son. Now that he is financially stable, he is fully prepared to take over his rightful duties as the primary caregiver. You have got to be kidding me, I said, glaring at Julian with absolute disgust. You told me you would rather die than change a diaper. You explicitly told me you wanted nothing to do with being a father. People change, Abigail Julian lied, smoothly crossing his arms and leaning casually against the doorframe. I have realized the error of my ways. I want to be a father to my boy. And frankly, considering your demanding schedule as a CEO and your highly publicized violent feud with your own parents, I do not think you are mentally fit to raise him. A child needs a stable home, not a war zone. Julian walked toward my desk, pulling a thick stack of legal documents from his jacket pocket. He slapped them down right on top of my mahogany desk. The bold black letters on the front page screamed, "Emergency Petition for Full Custody." My client is officially filing this petition tomorrow morning at the family courthouse, the lawyer added, flashing a threatening smile. We will drag you through the mud, Miss Wilson. We will subpoena your work records, question your sanity, and bring your mother to the stand to testify about your aggressive behavior. The press will feast on a multimillionaire tech founder fighting a vicious custody battle over an illegitimate child. Your clients will panic, investors will retreat, and your company valuation will collapse. Patricia stood right beside Julian, her arms crossed, completely reveling in my absolute horror. It is such a shame, Abigail, she mocked, shaking her head in fake sympathy. A long, drawn-out court battle could take years. It would be so traumatizing for little Leo. He might even end up in the foster system, while the judge decides who is fit to raise him. You could lose him forever. Julian leaned over the desk, his face inches from mine. The smell of his cheap cologne turned my stomach. Or Julian whispered, his eyes gleaming with absolute unfiltered greed. We can settle this right now, quietly. You sign a binding contract transferring $5 million into an offshore account in my name, and I will walk away forever. I will sign away all my parental rights. You keep the kid, I keep the cash. And Patricia gets her cut to secure a new mansion. Everybody wins. They were trying to hold my son hostage for $5 million. Patricia had brought the monster from my past directly to my doorstep, armed with a legal weapon designed to rip my heart out and drain my bank accounts. I looked down at the custody papers sitting on my desk. I looked at Julian's greedy, sweating face. Then I looked at Patricia, who was smiling as if she had just conquered the entire world. They thought I was completely cornered. They thought the threat of losing my baby would force me to instantly surrender my wealth and bow to their extortion. They forgot exactly who they were dealing with. The very next morning, the fluorescent lights of the Boston family courthouse buzzed overhead like an angry swarm of bees. I sat at the heavy oak respondents' table, wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit that radiated absolute impenetrable authority. Next to me, secured safely in his portable bassinet, my newborn son Leo was sleeping peacefully. I gently stroked his tiny warm hand with my index finger, completely unfazed by the circus unfolding around me. They had brought a monster from my past to my doorstep. But I was no longer the scared, broke girl Julian had abandoned. Across the aisle, Julian and his greasy bottom-feeding defense attorney were putting on the theatrical performance of a lifetime. Julian was seated on the witness stand, wearing the same ill-fitting suit from yesterday, but today he had added a prop, a crumpled tissue. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing out fake, pathetic tears as he spoke directly to the stern-faced family court judge. Your Honor. Julian choked out his voice, trembling with manufactured grief. I know I made terrible mistakes in the past. I was young, broke, and terrified of the overwhelming responsibility of fatherhood. But I am a completely changed man now. I have a stable career in sales. I have a safe home. I just want to protect my precious son from the chaotic, highly dangerous environment his mother has created. She is surrounded by criminals and family violence. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with severe silver hair, took notes without changing her expression. Julian stepped down, dabbing his dry eyes, and his lawyer immediately called their star witness to the stand, Patricia. My mother walked up to the witness box, wearing a modest, muted beige cardigan, deliberately leaving behind her usual flashy designer jewelry and heavy makeup. She had meticulously transformed herself into the picture of a heartbroken, deeply concerned grandmother, just trying to do what was right. She placed her hand over her heart and looked at the judge with wide, tear-filled eyes. It absolutely breaks my heart to sit here and say this about my own flesh and blood. Patricia wept, her performance sickeningly convincing to anyone who did not know her true nature. But Abigail has always been deeply unstable. She is violently vindictive, Your Honor. Just look at what she orchestrated against her own family. She sent her own father to a prison hospital out of pure jealous spite. She works all hours of the night at her technology company, constantly obsessing over her computer screens. She has absolutely zero maternal instincts. Patricia paused to let out a dramatic, shuddering sob, gripping the wooden rail of the witness box. She is entirely unfit to raise that precious little boy. Julian may have been absent initially, but he is a good man who simply wants to step up and give Leo the stable, loving home that I can no longer provide due to my daughter's vicious financial attacks on our estate. Julian's lawyer smirked at me from across the room, leaning back in his leather chair. Patricia shot me a microscopic, triumphant glare before burying her face in her tissue again. They actually thought they were winning. They thought their coordinated, tear-soaked perjury was enough to rip my son from my arms. They thought they had finally backed the powerful CEO of AB Tech Solutions into a corner, where my only option was to hand over a $5 million settlement to make them go away. I did not react. I did not yell in protest. I did not shed a single tear. I just kept my eyes locked on Patricia, feeling nothing but absolute freezing contempt. I turned to my high-powered family law attorney, Diane, and gave her a single, deliberate nod. Diane stood up, smoothly buttoning her immaculate blazer. "Your Honor," Diane said, her voice cutting through the courtroom's heavy silence like a diamond-tipped blade. "If opposing counsel is quite finished with this fictional theatrical production, the respondent would like to submit Exhibit A into the official court record." Diane handed a thick, sealed folder to the bailiff, who promptly passed it up to the judge's bench. Diane then walked over and dropped a duplicate copy directly onto the table in front of Julian's smug lawyer. "What you are looking at, Your Honor, is a certified encrypted bank wire transfer record," Diane explained, her tone icy and relentlessly precise. "This specific transaction was initiated exactly 48 hours ago. The transfer originated from an offshore shell account registered under Patricia's maiden name, an account she deliberately and illegally hid from the IRS seizure last week. The destination account belongs directly to the petitioner sitting right there, Julian." Julian's fake grief vanished instantly. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly, terrified shade of gray. He gripped the edge of his wooden table, his knuckles turning stark white. "The transfer amount is exactly $50,000. Diane continued, making sure every single syllable echoed loudly in the silent room. "Listed in the official memo line is the phrase, legal retainer advance. Patricia did not come to this courthouse today out of concern for her grandson. She paid a deadbeat father $50,000 of stolen, hidden money to commit blatant perjury, file a fraudulent emergency custody claim, and attempt to extort my client for $5 million. Patricia leaped up from the gallery bench, her modest grandmother persona instantly evaporating into pure, unhinged panic. "That is a lie!" Patricia shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me while her face turned a violent shade of crimson. "She hacked my accounts. She is a computer genius. It is another deep fake. She is framing us." "Sit down and remain completely silent, ma'am, or I will have the bailiffs remove you in handcuffs and hold you in criminal contempt." The judge barked, slamming her heavy wooden gavel against the sound block. The judge scrutinized the certified banking documents, her expression hardening into absolute terrifying fury. She looked down at Julian, who was now visibly sweating through his cheap suit, his breathing growing shallow and erratic. "Mr. Julian," the judge demanded, her voice dangerously low, "did you accept a $50,000 illicit payment to initiate this fraudulent custody proceeding and lie under oath in my courtroom?" Julian stammered helplessly. He looked desperately at his lawyer, but his lawyer was completely ignoring him, hastily shoving papers into his leather briefcase, aggressively distancing himself. The lawyer clearly realized his client had lied to him and that he was about to be implicated in a massive federal extortion ring. "Your Honor, it was just a loan," Julian lied, his voice cracking in sheer terror. "I needed temporary funds for the legal fees to protect my son." Before the judge could issue her ruling on the undeniable perjury, the heavy wooden double doors at the very back of the courtroom swung open with a massive, deafening thud. Two uniformed Boston police officers stepped inside, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. Right behind them was a plainclothes detective holding a thick manila folder. The entire courtroom froze, watching the officers march past the wooden pews. "Excuse me, Your Honor," the detective announced, stepping firmly into the center aisle of the courtroom. "We sincerely apologize for the interruption of these proceedings, but we have a matter of immediate, cross-jurisdictional law enforcement." The detective walked past Patricia, who was hyperventilating in the gallery, and locked eyes entirely with Julian. Julian looked like his legs were about to give out. He took a terrified step backward, bumping into his own chair. "Julian," the detective stated loudly, unfolding a stamped piece of paper for the entire court to see. "We have a nationwide felony extradition warrant for your immediate arrest. The warrant was issued this morning by a federal judge in the state of Texas. You are wanted for 3 counts of corporate wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." The detective's words echoed off the heavy mahogany walls of the courtroom. Julian's fake, theatrical grief instantly evaporated, replaced by the raw, unfiltered terror of a cornered rat. He stumbled backward, his knees hitting the solid wood of the respondent's table. His eyes darted wildly toward the heavy double doors at the back of the room, then toward the large, arched windows, his mind desperately calculating an impossible escape route. "Do not even think about it," the plainclothes detective warned, his hand resting casually on his heavy utility belt. "Put your hands behind your back, right now." Julian's greasy defense attorney did not waste a single second defending his client. The man snapped his battered leather briefcase shut, practically leaping away from Julian, as if the cheap sweating suit were highly contagious. "Your Honor," the lawyer stammered, raising both hands in a gesture of absolute surrender, "I had absolutely no knowledge of my client's outstanding federal warrants or this illicit $50,000 financial transaction. I formally request to withdraw as his legal counsel immediately." "Request granted," the judge replied coldly, her heavy wooden gavel striking the sound block with a terrifying crack. Julian lunged toward the gallery, pointing a shaking, sweating finger directly at Patricia. "She put me up to this!" Julian screamed, his voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine as the 2 uniformed Boston police officers grabbed him by the shoulders. "She told me Abigail controlled millions. She wired me the 50 grand to pay off my investors in Texas and told me exactly what lies to say to the judge. I do not even care about the kid. I just needed the cash. It was all her idea." The cold, metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed sharply through the silent courtroom. Julian sobbed loudly, a genuine, ugly, guttural sound, as the officers forcefully dragged him down the center aisle. He was no longer the smug opportunist trying to extort $5 million from a single mother. He was exactly what I had always known him to be, a pathetic coward facing decades in a maximum security federal penitentiary. Patricia stood completely frozen in the gallery. The modest, heartbroken grandmother persona she had meticulously crafted for the hearing was entirely shattered. She looked like an empty shell, her pale face contrasting sharply with her muted beige cardigan. She had brought a monster to my doorstep to steal my newborn son. And instead, she had handed the justice system the exact weapon needed to completely destroy her own life. The severe, silver-haired judge turned her piercing gaze toward the gallery, her eyes locking onto my mother with absolute disgust. Bailiff the judge commanded, her voice vibrating with lethal authority, "Do not let that woman leave this courtroom." Two heavy-set court bailiffs immediately stepped off the walls, moving smoothly to flank Patricia on both sides. Patricia gasped, her hands flying to her throat as if she were suddenly struggling to breathe. "Patricia Wilson," the judge announced, leaning heavily over the high wooden bench. "In my 20 years presiding over the family court, I have seen bitter disputes, greedy relatives, and incredibly ugly divorces. But I have rarely witnessed such a sickening, calculated, and malicious abuse of the judicial system. You deliberately orchestrated a fraudulent emergency custody petition. You bribed a known federal fugitive with $50,000 of hidden stolen offshore funds. You stood under oath in my courtroom, placed your hand on a Bible, and committed blatant perjury to extort your own biological daughter. I did it for my family." Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing frantically off the high ceilings as she tried to back away from the advancing bailiffs. "You do not understand. She destroyed us. She put her own father in a prison hospital. We had nothing left. The government took our money. She owes us. She owes me." The judge struck her gavel so hard the entire bench shook. Silence. "You are currently facing imminent indictment by the district attorney for witness tampering, bribery, and multiple felony counts of perjury," the judge stated, her tone relentless and freezing. "But my jurisdiction is family law, and I will ensure you never weaponize this court or this innocent child ever again." The judge picked up her heavy fountain pen, slashing her signature violently across a thick stack of legal documents. "I am officially dismissing this emergency custody petition with prejudice. Furthermore, I am stripping you, Patricia Wilson, of any and all prospective grandparent rights. You are legally barred from ever filing another motion regarding this child in the state of Massachusetts." But I am not finished. "Due to the severe emotional abuse, documented extortion, and clear physical threat you pose to the respondent, I am granting a permanent, ironclad restraining order." Patricia's knees buckled. She reached out, gripping the wooden pew in front of her to keep from hitting the marble floor. "You are legally forbidden from coming within 1,000 feet of Abigail Wilson, Leo Wilson, or any of their current and future residences and places of employment," the judge finalized. "If you so much as send an email, a text message, or attempt to pass a note through a third party, you will be arrested immediately and held without bail." Patricia looked at me. Her eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely unhinged. The arrogant, wealthy socialite who used to lock me in the basement for getting better grades than Savannah was entirely dead. The woman standing before me was a broken, destitute criminal who had finally run out of lies. "Abigail, please," Patricia begged, her voice a raspy, desperate croak. She ignored the bailiff standing beside her. She ignored the furious judge. She stared directly at me, tears of absolute humiliation streaming down her ruined face. "I am your mother. I gave you life. You cannot let them do this to me. I will be sleeping on the streets tonight. I have no one. Richard is dying." Savannah blocked my phone number. "Please, just give me enough cash to disappear. Just 1 million. You have millions. It is absolute pocket change to you. Have mercy." I sat calmly at the heavy oak respondents' table. I reached into the portable bassinet and gently lifted Leo into my arms. He was awake now, his tiny blue eyes blinking up at the bright fluorescent lights, completely oblivious to the chaos around him. I held my son close to my chest, breathing in the sweet, clean scent of baby powder. I felt no pity. I felt no guilt. I felt nothing but absolute freezing peace. I looked at Patricia. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the icy, impenetrable authority of a woman who had finally conquered the demons of her past. "Take her away," I said clearly. "No!" Patricia screamed, a wild, feral sound, thrashing violently as the two massive bailiffs grabbed her arms and hauled her backward. "You cannot do this to me! I am Patricia Wilson! I am a Wilson, you ungrateful, vicious brat! I curse you! I curse you and your money!" Her unhinged screams echoed down the marble hallway as they dragged her forcefully out of the courtroom. The heavy wooden double doors swung shut behind her with a massive thud, cutting off her toxic voice forever. The silence that followed was beautiful. It was the sound of absolute victory. My high-powered family law attorney Diane calmly gathered her files, snapping her expensive leather briefcase shut. She turned to me, a rare, genuine smile crossing her face. "That went exactly as planned," Diane noted, adjusting her immaculate charcoal blazer. "Your son is perfectly safe, Abigail. Julian will be locked in a federal penitentiary for the next 2 decades, and Patricia is legally barred from ever casting a shadow over your life again." I stood up, holding Leo securely against my shoulder. I know I replied smoothly, grabbing my own tailored jacket. But Patricia's criminal charges are just the emotional closure. I want to talk about the financial retribution. Have you received the final update from the federal bankruptcy court? Diane nodded, her eyes gleaming with sharp professional satisfaction. She pulled a thick blue-backed legal document from her briefcase and handed it to me. The federal judge signed the final asset seizure order 20 minutes ago. I looked down at the official court seal stamped on the front page. This was the absolute final nail in the coffin of Richard and Patricia Wilson. For 5 years, my father had systematically embezzled a $500,000 a month trust fund that legally belonged to me. He had used my stolen money to fund his extravagant, arrogant lifestyle. My money had paid for his custom Italian suits, his luxury sports cars, Savannah's ridiculous Ivy League tuition, and the massive, sprawling mansion outside Boston that Patricia prized above all else in the world. The federal government had already frozen their liquid bank accounts, but freezing cash was not nearly enough to repay the millions upon millions they had stolen from my future. The bankruptcy court has officially pierced the corporate veil of Richard's shadow trusts, Diane explained, walking beside me as we exited the courtroom and stepped into the bright, sunlit hallway of the courthouse. Because the forensic accountants proved that the stolen trust fund money was directly used to pay the mortgage, property taxes, and massive renovations on their primary estate, the judge has stripped them of all primary residence property protection. I traced my finger over the bold black ink on the final page of the order. The mansion, the grand, luxurious symbol of their arrogance, their fake family legacy, and my lifelong subjugation, was legally no longer theirs. The estate has been formally seized by the United States Marshals, Diane continued. More than $26 million recovered from domestic accounts, brokerage portfolios, and Gregory's illegal management fees was transferred yesterday into your court-protected trust. The mansion, antique furniture, chandeliers, art collection, and Patricia's jewelry vault will be sold at public auction next month, with every remaining dollar added to that restitution account. By the time the gavel falls, you will have enough restored liquid capital to bid without touching AB Tech Solutions' operating funds. They are literally losing the roof over their heads, I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. They have already lost it, Diane corrected smoothly, pressing the down button for the elevator. Federal agents placed heavy steel padlocks on the wrought iron gates of the driveway this morning. The Wilson estate is completely empty. It is just brick and glass, waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. I looked out the large glass windows of the courthouse, staring at the sprawling Boston skyline. The city looked different today. Brighter, cleaner. The suffocating, toxic weight of my abusive family had been completely and surgically eradicated. Richard was rotting in a prison hospital bed, stripped of his legacy and his fake golden child. Savannah was a broke, disowned fraud running from her own shadow with declining credit cards. Julian was in chains, headed for a brutal Texas prison. And Patricia, the woman who had tried to sell my infant son for $5 million, was a homeless, penniless criminal who had just been dragged out of a courtroom screaming. They had spent my entire life trying to convince me I was nothing but dirt beneath their designer shoes. They had stolen my money, mocked my ambition, and tried to actively destroy my future. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. They had vastly underestimated the quiet, resilient girl they had abused. I was no longer the family scapegoat. I was the absolute architect of their destruction. Diane paused as the elevator doors chimed open. "Will you be attending the property auction next month, Abigail? It is open to the general public. It might be incredibly satisfying to watch some random stranger buy Patricia's custom marble kitchen at a discount." I looked down at Leo, who was sleeping peacefully against my chest, completely untouched by the chaos and malice that had just been permanently eradicated from his life. I gently kissed the top of his soft head, feeling the steady, strong beat of his tiny heart. I smiled at Diane, my mind already formulating the final crushing move. "I will not be watching a stranger buy it, Diane," I replied, my voice ringing with absolute unshakable power as I stepped into the elevator. "I am going to buy it myself. And then I am going to hire a commercial demolition crew to bulldoze that entire mansion into the dirt, and I am going to build a public community park right over the ashes of their ruined legacy." The bitter winter wind swept across the meticulously manicured lawns of the Wilson estate. The sprawling mansion outside Boston stood like a towering monument to decades of stolen wealth, its custom-imported marble columns gleaming under the pale morning sun. Today, that monument was being liquidated. The public auction had drawn a massive crowd. Elite real estate developers, rival tech billionaires, and predatory investors mingled on the pristine driveway, studying glossy auction catalogs distributed by the federal bankruptcy trustees. But the real spectacle was not the auction itself. The real spectacle was happening just outside the heavy wrought iron security gates. Patricia and Savannah stood on the public sidewalk, effectively locked out of the very kingdom they had ruled with absolute terror for decades. The transformation was startling and pathetic. Savannah was wearing a stained tracksuit, her blonde hair pulled into a messy, greasy knot. She was shivering in the cold, clutching a cheap paper coffee cup. Patricia looked even worse. The once terrifying matriarch of the Wilson family was practically unrecognizable. She wore a faded, oversized trench coat that she had clearly slept in for days. Her face was gaunt, hollowed out by the stress of impending criminal charges and the crushing reality of absolute poverty. They were not standing there in silence. They were desperately, frantically begging. As the elite socialites of the Boston Country Club circuit walked past the gates to register for the auction, Patricia lunged forward, grabbing the sleeve of a wealthy banking magnate she had known for 20 years. Eleanor Patricia pleaded, her voice a raspy, desperate whine. "Eleanor, please stop. You have to listen to me. You know how much this house means to the family. You have to bid on it. Buy it, Eleanor. Just buy it and let Savannah and me live in the guest house. We will work for you. We will clean it. Just do not let them take our home." Eleanor stopped looking down at Patricia's shaking hand, gripping her expensive cashmere coat. Eleanor did not show an ounce of pity. She forcefully yanked her arm away, brushing her sleeve as if Patricia had transmitted a deadly disease. "Do not ever touch me again, Patricia," Eleanor stated, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. "You are a convicted fraud. Your husband is a thief who stole from a baby. You are a social contagion, and you are entirely delusional if you think anyone in this neighborhood will ever associate with you again. Get out of my way before I call the police for harassment." Eleanor turned her back and walked proudly through the open security gates. Patricia let out a broken, pathetic wail, collapsing against the cold iron bars. Savannah aggressively kicked the brick pillar holding the gate, screaming obscenities at the women who used to attend her lavish garden parties. Every single billionaire, every former friend, every socialite they begged completely ignored them. The Wilsons were dead to the world, buried under the weight of their own monumental greed. The auctioneer, a sharp man in a tailored suit, stepped up to the wooden podium erected on the mansion's grand front steps. He tapped his microphone instantly, commanding the attention of the wealthy crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to auction the primary estate of the Wilson Trust. This property sits on 4 acres of prime real estate featuring imported Italian marble, a custom temperature-controlled wine vault, and a fully equipped guest wing. We will open the bidding at $8 million. Before a single paddle could be raised, a massive, custom, armored black Lincoln Navigator turned onto the street. The sheer size and aggressive stance of the vehicle immediately drew the eyes of the entire crowd. The heavy engine purred ominously as the SUV glided to a smooth stop, directly parallel to the wrought iron gates, mere feet from where Patricia and Savannah were standing. 2 private security contractors stepped out of the front doors, scanning the perimeter with cold efficiency. Then the rear passenger door swung open. I stepped out onto the pavement. I wore a razor-sharp, custom-tailored midnight blue trench coat over a pristine white suit, radiating absolute unfiltered power. The crisp wind caught the edge of my coat as I slid a pair of designer sunglasses off my face. I held a sleek black auction paddle in my right hand. The bright white number 1 was printed boldly on the front. I had bypassed the registration line completely, securing VIP pre-approval directly through the federal trustees. The crowd of billionaires on the lawn went entirely silent. They recognized me immediately. I was not the scapegoat daughter anymore. I was the multimillionaire CEO who had single-handedly destroyed the Wilson empire. Savannah froze. Her eyes bulged out of her head as she stared at the sheer scale of my wealth. The armored car, the security detail, the impeccable tailoring. It was everything she had ever wanted, everything she thought she deserved, and it all belonged to the sister she had tortured since childhood. "You!" Savannah shrieked, her voice cracking as she launched herself toward me. One of my security guards instantly stepped forward, planting a massive hand on her shoulder and forcefully shoving her backward onto the pavement. "Keep your distance, ma'am," the guard warned, his tone lethal. Savannah scrambled back to her feet, her face contorted in a mask of pure, unhinged jealousy. "Why are you here?" Savannah screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the massive mansion behind the gates. "You already took the bank accounts. You already put Dad in a prison hospital. Are you here to buy it? Are you going to buy our house just to lock us out? Did you come here to humiliate me?" Patricia crawled forward on her hands and knees, pressing her face against the cold iron gate. Abigail Patricia wept a sickening, desperate sound. "Abigail, please. You won. You destroyed us. Just let someone else buy it. Do not take the house. It is the only thing we have left of our legacy." I did not even look at them. I kept my eyes locked on the auctioneer standing on the front steps. He was watching me with wide, expectant eyes. He knew exactly who had the deepest pockets on the eastern seaboard. "I will open the bidding at $8 million," the auctioneer repeated, his voice slightly breathless. Do I have 8 million? I slowly raised the black paddle into the cold winter air. $20 million, I stated. My voice was not a shout. It was a cold, perfectly modulated command that cut through the silence like a scalpel. Cash, wired immediately upon the drop of the hammer. The crowd gasped. The prominent real estate developers who had come hoping for a discount instantly lowered their paddles. 20 million cash was an astronomical overpayment, an aggressive, undeniable show of force designed to completely crush the room. No one dared to bid against me. Bidding against AB Tech Solutions was financial suicide. 20 million, going once, the auctioneer stammered, staring at the stunned crowd. 20 million going twice. He brought the heavy wooden gavel down against the podium with a sharp, echoing crack. Sold. To Miss Abigail Wilson. The crowd erupted in frantic whispers. I slowly lowered my paddle. The absolute final piece of the Wilson dynasty was legally mine. Every brick, every crystal chandelier, every blade of grass now belonged directly to me. Savannah let out a guttural, feral scream. You vindictive, psychotic monster, Savannah roared, gripping her own hair in absolute madness. You bought it. You actually bought it. You are going to live in my house, you are going to sleep in my room and wear my crown just to rub it in my face. You bought this entire estate just to humiliate me. I finally turned my head to look at Savannah. I stared at her greasy hair, her ruined clothes, and her pathetic, bottomless entitlement. A slow, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. It was the smile of an apex predator looking at the bones of its prey. No, Savannah, I replied, my voice echoing with terrifying, icy calm. I did not buy this mansion to live in it. I did not buy it to humiliate you. I stepped closer to the iron gates, looking directly down at Patricia, who was sobbing uncontrollably on the concrete. I bought it to flatten it. I raised my right hand into the air and snapped my fingers twice. For a moment, there was only the sound of the winter wind. Then the ground beneath our feet began to vibrate. A low, thunderous roar echoed from the end of the exclusive suburban street. The billionaires on the lawn turned their heads in confusion. Patricia stopped crying, her eyes darting wildly. Rolling slowly and aggressively down the pristine tree-lined avenue was a convoy of massive, heavy-duty commercial demolition equipment. 5 giant yellow excavators, bulldozers, and reinforced wrecking machines rumbled toward the estate. The diesel engines roared like mechanical beasts, spewing thick black exhaust into the clear morning air. The machines were massive, their heavy steel treads chewing up the expensive asphalt, their massive iron buckets raised high and ready to strike. They pulled up directly behind my armored Lincoln, forming a terrifying wall of yellow steel. What is that? Patricia gasped, her face draining of all remaining color. What are you doing? The foreman of the demolition crew, a burly man in a hard hat and a high-visibility vest, hopped down from the lead excavator and jogged over to me. He carried a heavy digital clipboard. Miss Wilson, the foreman said respectfully, the city permits are fully cleared. As the new legal owner, we just need your verbal authorization to commence the teardown. Tear down! Savannah shrieked, her voice breaking into a hyperventilating panic. No, you cannot. That is imported Italian marble. That is mahogany. Our history is in that house. I looked at the foreman and gave him a single, definitive nod. Take it down to the foundation. Leave nothing standing but cleared ground. Yes, ma'am. The foreman blew a sharp whistle and signaled the operators. The heavy steel gates were unlocked. The excavators rolled onto the manicured lawn, their massive treads instantly destroying the pristine landscaping. Patricia and Savannah screamed in absolute, unfiltered agony. They gripped the iron bars of the outer fence, forced to watch as the lead excavator drove straight up to the grand entrance. With a deafening crash, the massive steel bucket swung forward, smashing directly through the custom mahogany double doors and shattering the massive crystal chandelier in the foyer. Glass exploded outward. The front facade of the house groaned and buckled. The second bulldozer slammed into the east wing, tearing down the walls of Savannah's former luxury suite, sending drywall, expensive wallpaper, and shattered memories cascading onto the lawn in a cloud of thick white dust. "No, Patricia," wailed, beating her fists against the cold iron bars until her knuckles bled. "Stop them! Somebody stop them! My beautiful house! My beautiful home, please!" Savannah collapsed onto her knees, screaming until her vocal cords gave out completely, broken by the sight of her stolen kingdom being violently crushed into a pile of worthless rubble. The billionaires and investors watched in stunned, terrified silence. They understood the message perfectly. Abigail Wilson did not just defeat her enemies. She eradicated their entire existence from the face of the earth. I stood calmly near my armored vehicle, watching the dust settle over the ruins of my childhood trauma. The deafening roar of the bulldozers was the sweetest symphony I had ever heard. It was the sound of complete and total liberation. "Miss Wilson," my lawyer Diane said, stepping out of the Lincoln and handing me a sleek digital tablet. "The architectural plans for the new construction are ready for your final approval." I looked down at the blueprints. Where the toxic, abusive mansion once stood, there would soon be a sprawling, beautiful public community park and a state-of-the-art charity foundation headquarters. It would provide free technology education and resources to underprivileged children across the state. I signed my name at the bottom of the digital screen, sealing the fate of the land forever. "What are we naming the foundation?" Abigail Diane asked, raising her voice to be heard over the sound of the collapsing mansion. I looked back at the rubble, then turned away from the screaming remnants of my past. I looked toward the city skyline, thinking of the tiny, perfect heartbeat of my son waiting safely for me at home. "We are naming it the Leo Wilson Foundation," I replied, my voice ringing with absolute, unbreakable triumph. "Let us go home, Diane. We are completely done here." 6 weeks after the mansion was turned to dust, the heavy doors of the federal courthouse slammed shut on the Wilson legacy forever. I sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by my attorney Diane and my grandmother Beatrice. My grandmother rested her hands on her silver cane, her face an unreadable mask of absolute stone. We were there to watch the final act of a very long, very painful play. Richard and Gregory were led into the courtroom wearing faded orange federal jumpsuits, their wrists and ankles bound by heavy steel chains. They looked like hollowed-out ghosts of the arrogant men they used to be. Richard, the man who used to command massive corporate boardrooms with a single intimidating glare, now trembled uncontrollably, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately looking for a sympathetic face that did not exist. The judge did not waste time with pleasantries or prolonged legal speeches. He looked down from the high wooden bench with utter disgust. For 5 years of systemic financial fraud, tax evasion, and the malicious, calculated embezzlement of a beneficiary trust, Richard Wilson was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary. Gregory, for his direct complicity, forgery, extortion, and money laundering, received 8 years. As the heavy wooden gavel struck the sound block with a deafening crack, Richard collapsed into his chair, burying his pale face in his chained hands. He was going to spend the rest of his functional life stripped of his custom Italian suits, stolen wealth, corporate authority, and false family legacy. Gregory wept openly, sobbing and begging the judge for mercy that would never come, while the marshals stood unmoved beside him. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I simply stood up, smoothed out the front of my tailored jacket, and walked out of the courtroom into the crisp, clean afternoon air. While the men were loaded into transport vans and sent to federal prison, Patricia and Savannah entered a different punishment. Patricia accepted felony pleas for perjury, witness bribery, and accessory fraud, receiving strict probation, electronic monitoring, and crushing restitution. Because of her age and medical history, Savannah pleaded guilty to credit card fraud and received probation, community service, and repayment orders. Stripped of every asset, hidden account, and piece of property, they were forced into a cramped social housing apartment on the neglected outskirts of the city. There were no marble floors, crystal chandeliers, or staff-only peeling wallpaper, a leaking sink, mattresses on the floor, and the suffocating smell of cheap bleach. To pay off the massive mountain of legal debts and court-ordered restitution the two former elite socialites were forced to take, the only jobs that would hire women carrying criminal records with zero actual skills. They washed dishes in the sweltering, windowless back kitchen of a rundown 24-hour diner. Every single day, Patricia submerged her once perfectly manicured hands into scalding, greasy dishwater, aggressively scrubbing baked-on food off cheap ceramic plates. Savannah, whose hands used to hold nothing heavier than a crystal champagne flute, now had cracked, bleeding knuckles from harsh industrial detergents. She stood right next to Patricia, her blonde hair tied back in a greasy hairnet, wearing a stained, oversized uniform that permanently smelled like rancid fry oil. They hated the back-breaking work, but more than anything, they absolutely despised each other. The cramped, dirty social housing apartment became a daily war zone. Every single night, after completing their grueling 12-hour shifts, they would tear each other apart in vicious screaming matches that echoed loudly down the concrete hallways. Savannah would throw cheap plastic cups at the wall, screaming at Patricia for ruining her life, blaming her mother's illicit affair and criminal greed for stripping away her luxury cars and Ivy League status. "You are a disgusting liar," Savannah would shriek, her voice hoarse and broken. "You made me a fake. You made me a bastard. You ruined everything I was supposed to be." Patricia would scream right back, her face contorted with bitter, venomous rage, calling Savannah an ungrateful, useless burden who abandoned her the exact second the money ran out. They had absolutely no one left to blame, no convenient scapegoat to absorb their toxicity, so they fed on each other like starving, rabid animals in a cage. They were trapped together in absolute poverty, drowning in a sea of mutual hatred, endless regret, and bitter resentment. 1 year later, the world had nearly forgotten the Wilson name. The toxic ashes of my past had been cleared away and replaced by something useful. On the former estate grounds outside Boston, a state-of-the-art glass and steel headquarters now rose beside public gardens, classrooms, and a community technology center. I stood on the grand stage, facing the new entrance. Today was the official opening of the Leo Wilson Foundation. I wore a razor-sharp, immaculate white, custom-tailored suit that radiated pure, unshakable authority. My hair was styled perfectly, blowing gently in the cool spring breeze. Standing right beside me was Beatrice, looking incredibly proud, her silver cane resting firmly on the plush red carpet. And in my arms was Leo. My beautiful, perfect son was now a thriving, highly energetic toddler. He was wearing a tiny, custom-tailored navy suit, clapping his small hands and giggling at the massive crowd gathered before us. He had just started walking, taking brave, determined steps across the stage before demanding to be picked back up. I held him tightly against my chest. He was safe. He was fiercely loved, and he would never know the pain, the manipulation, or the freezing fear that had entirely defined my childhood. Hundreds of people were gathered on the sunlit plaza below the stage. Elite philanthropists, city officials, tech innovators, and the national press had all come to witness the launch of an organization backed by a massive $30 million endowment. A foundation entirely dedicated to providing advanced technology education, aggressive legal protection, and full-ride university scholarships to abuse survivors and underprivileged youth across the nation. I stepped up to the thick crystal podium, adjusting the microphone. The massive crowd instantly fell completely silent, hanging on to every single word. For a very long time, I was told that my worth was defined by the people who actively tried to break me. I began, my voice echoing powerfully across the plaza. I was told that I was a failure, a permanent disappointment, an outcast who did not deserve a seat at the table. But I learned the hard way that true power does not come from inheriting a stolen crown. True power comes from surviving the fire and using the flames to forge an unbreakable sword. I looked down at the crowd, my gaze steady, cold and fierce. We are not defined by the trauma inflicted upon us by those who were supposed to protect us. We are defined by how we choose to rebuild from the ashes. The Leo Wilson Foundation is not just a building, it is a fortress. It is a legally binding promise to every single person who has ever been told they are not enough, who has ever been marginalized, abused, or stripped of their rightful future. We will give them the tools, the education, and the resources to take back their power. We will teach them exactly how to build their own empires, and we will ensure that no one is ever left defenseless in the dark again. The crowd erupted into deafening, thunderous applause. Flashbulbs went off in rapid succession, capturing the exact moment of absolute, unfiltered victory. I turned away from the podium and smiled brightly at Beatrice. She reached out, placing a warm, steady hand on my shoulder, giving me a single definitive nod of profound respect. I set Leo down on the red carpet, holding his tiny hand, as he waddled eagerly toward the thick, ceremonial red silk ribbon stretched tightly across the grand glass entrance. Diane stepped forward with a proud smile, presenting me with a pair of oversized golden scissors. I knelt down slightly, guiding Leo's small hands over mine as we closed the heavy golden blades together. With a sharp, satisfying snip, the red ribbon fell to the pristine marble floor. The cheering grew even louder, rolling across the public gardens and reflecting from the foundation's glass facade. Golden confetti rained through the bright morning sunlight. I picked Leo back up, lifted him against my chest, and looked into the vast blue sky. The nightmare of that mansion, the dark basement, the violent screaming, the endless belittling, and the fear of never being enough was completely gone. Richard, Patricia, Savannah, and Gregory were buried beneath the consequences of their own greed and deception. The role of family scapegoat no longer defined me. I was no longer a victim waiting for permission to exist. I was Abigail Wilson, an independent, multimillionaire technology CEO, a fiercely loving mother, and the architect of my own future. The traumatic past was closed permanently, and the new life Leo and I had built was finally beginning in peace.